If a whole town stayed warm by looking away, who would be brave enough to open the door? Eli Mercer thought he had buried his heart with the wife he never got to say goodbye to. Then, in a Minnesota blizzard, he found a pregnant German shepherd locked inside an overturned trailer. She was freezing, wounded, and still protecting a bag that belonged to a missing old furnace repairman. What she carried would lead Eli to cold houses, stolen heating aid, and neighbors too ashamed to ask for help. But before he could expose the truth, Eli had to learn that mercy is not just rescuing someone once. It is staying when the world turns cold. Tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches you, please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. Winter made the Iron Range look holy from a distance. Snow softened the rusted head frames, buried the old rail spurs, and laid a bright white hand over the abandoned pits, where men had once pulled iron from the earth like blood from stone. Under moonlight, the frozen lakes shone like hammered silver. The black pines stood close together, solemn as monks keeping a vow. Even the derelict mine buildings, with their broken windows and skeletal beams, seemed almost gentle when the snow dressed them. Eli Mercer knew better. He had lived among those woods long enough to understand that winter did not forgive. It only made danger beautiful. His cabin stood north of town, where the road narrowed between pine timber and a frozen creek that talked under the ice when the nights grew bitter. The house was built of dark cedar logs, low-roofed and stubborn, with a stone chimney that smoked whenever Eli remembered to feed the fire. Most people in Ash River Crossing thought of it as a lonely place. Eli thought that was too sentimental. A place could not be lonely. Only a man could do that to it. He was 50 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with the compact strength of a man whose body had been trained long ago and then maintained by habit, woodcutting, and refusal. His face had the clean, hard lines of an older American photograph, strong jaw, high cheekbones, straight nose, no beard. His dark hair was kept in a neat undercut, silver showing clearly at the sides. He wore an olive-drab combat shirt beneath his canvas winter jacket, the sleeves patterned in faded camouflage with horizontal bands at the upper arms. It was not a costume. Eli did not dress to remember the war. He dressed that way because the shirt still fit, still worked, and because changing small things required admitting that life had moved on without asking permission. Since Claire died, he had become a man of useful errands. He sharpened axes for widows. He cleared snow from porches before dawn so no one had to thank him. He repaired barn latches, patched leaking roofs, hauled firewood, and fixed engines that should have been retired before several presidents. When people invited him inside, he usually found a reason to leave. The old women of the town called him polite. The old men called him steady. Pastor Amos Bell, who had a dangerous habit of seeing through people, once called him a locked church with the bell still inside. Eli had not appreciated the metaphor. Claire would have laughed at it. That was the trouble with grief. It did not only take the person. It turned every remembered laugh into a small ambush. Claire Mercer had died of cancer while Eli was on his last deployment offshore, somewhere beyond the reach of weather reports and ordinary mercy. He had spoken to her 3 days before the end. She had told him she was tired but fine, which was exactly the kind of lie a loving woman told a husband trained to run toward danger but helpless before a hospital bed. By the time Eli made it home, the house smelled of flowers sent by people who did not know what else to do. He had missed the final breath. He had missed the final look. He had missed the chance to say he was sorry for every absence he had once called duty. After that, silence became easier than comfort. On the night everything began, Eli was driving back from the white-steepled church at the edge of Ash River Crossing. Amos had asked him to check the backup generator before the storm hit full force. The pastor had pretended it was a casual favor. Eli had pretended not to notice the basement stacked with wool blankets, folding cots, canned soup, kerosene lamps, and 3 old coffee urns waiting like soldiers. "Just in case," Amos had said, his silver beard tucked into a burgundy scarf, keys jingling at his belt. Just in case what? In case winter remembers, we're all mortal. Eli had tightened a fuel line, tested the generator twice, and left before Amos could offer coffee. Now the storm had swallowed the main road. A county plow sat sideways near the south bend, orange lights pulsing weakly through the whiteout. Eli turned onto the old mine road instead, a narrow service route that cut behind the abandoned ore yard and dropped through a stand of black spruce before meeting the ridge road near his cabin. He knew the way by memory. He had driven worse roads in worse places. Still, he kept both hands on the wheel. Snow flew hard against the windshield. The wipers fought and lost and fought again. His old truck groaned over ruts hidden beneath the drift. Outside, the mine structures rose and vanished, iron ribs in the storm. The wind moved through them with a long, hollow moan. Then his headlights caught something wrong. At first, it was only a shape where no shape belonged. A dark mass tilted across the ditch near the curve down to Larch Hollow. Eli eased off the gas. The truck slid a little, corrected, then slowed to a crawl. A livestock trailer lay on its side in the snow. One wheel turned weakly in the wind. Eli stopped 20 yards away and sat still for 2 breaths, letting the scene speak before he entered it. Old training lived in him not as drama, but as order. Engine running, headlights on, no other vehicle visible. Fresh drag marks half covered. Trailer hitch twisted. No hazard lights. No voices. He took the flashlight from the passenger seat, stepped into the storm, and felt the cold strike his face like a hand. The trailer was dented along one side, the rear door jammed against the drift. Its metal panels ticked and shuddered under the wind. Eli swept the beam across the road and saw tire tracks already filling with snow, wide and uneven. Whoever had pulled the trailer had left in a hurry, or had been unable to stay. He was about to circle back toward the truck for his pry bar when he heard it. A scrape. Not the wind, not loose metal. Something lower, weaker, deliberate. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Eli turned the flashlight toward the narrow upper vent of the overturned trailer. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, a dark nose appeared behind the slats. A breath steamed out. A paw scraped once more from inside. Eli's mouth tightened. "Easy," he said, though the storm tore the word away. "I hear you." The rear latch had been secured with a chain and padlock, not a transport lock, a deliberate one. Eli went back to his truck, pulled bolt cutters and a crowbar from the toolbox, then returned with his shoulders hunched against the wind. The lock fought him for less than 10 seconds before it snapped. The door was still jammed. He wedged the crowbar into the bent frame and pushed. Metal shrieked. The sound vanished into the snow. He pushed again, boots slipping, breath burning in his lungs. The frame gave an inch, then another. Enough for the smell to come out. Cold metal, animal fear, old straw, blood, diesel. Eli set his jaw and widened the gap. Inside, half buried in loose straw and spilled feed bags, lay a German shepherd. Female, yellow and black, heavy with pregnancy. Her coat was rimed with ice along the shoulders and back. A broad, uneven black saddle ran from her neck toward her hips like spilled ink, while her legs showed deep honey gold beneath the frost. One ear stood sharp, the other bore a small triangular tear along the edge. Her face was masked in black, darker around the left eye, and under the right eye a pale golden mark curved downward like a drop of oil. Her amber-brown eyes fixed on Eli with exhausted suspicion. She did not bark. She did not crawl toward him. She shifted, painfully, placing her body more firmly over a dark canvas bag tucked beneath her chest. That stopped him more than a bark would have. Most frightened animals tried to escape pain. This one was guarding something through it. Eli lowered himself onto one knee in the broken doorway, keeping his movements slow. The wind roared over his back. Snow blew into the trailer and dusted the dog's muzzle. "I'm not taking it," he said quietly. "Not from you." The shepherd's lips trembled. Not a snarl. Not quite. Her front paws were scraped raw, claws split where she had tried to dig through metal or frozen wood. Her belly tightened once, and she released a thin, controlled whine that made Eli's hand still in midair. Pregnant, hurt, locked in. Something old and cold moved inside his chest. Not anger yet. Anger was clean. This was heavier. A recognition that cruelty had passed this way, wearing gloves. He pulled off his outer jacket and spread it on the snow beside the trailer door. Then he reached in, one hand under the dog's chest, one beneath her hips, careful of the swollen belly. She stiffened and turned her head toward his wrist. He expected teeth. Instead, she pressed the edge of her mouth around his sleeve and held it. Not biting. Warning. A bargain. "All right," he whispered. "The bag comes too." With his free hand, he dragged the canvas bag out first and set it on the jacket. Only then did the shepherd allow him to lift her. She was heavier than she looked, all muscle, unborn pups, fear, and stubborn will. When he carried her to the truck, her whole body shook against him. But even half-conscious, she kept her eyes on the bag. The truck cab filled with the smell of wet fur and winter blood. Eli laid her across the back seat on his jacket, tucked the canvas bag against the floor where she could see it, and turned the heater high. The dog's breath came shallow. Her eyes flicked once to him, then to the bag, then to the storm beyond the windshield. Eli got behind the wheel and did something he hadn't done in years. He spoke to another living thing as if it might matter. "Stay with me." The road home took 25 minutes and felt longer than some deployments. Twice the truck slid toward the ditch. Once a fallen branch forced him to get out and drag it aside while the wind beat snow against his neck. Each time he returned, the shepherd lifted her head a fraction, making sure the bag remained where she could see it. At the cabin, Eli carried her inside and laid her on old quilts near the wood stove. The room, usually arranged for one man and no surprises, seemed to recoil at the sudden presence of need. One mug by the sink, one chair at the table, one pair of boots by the door. One photograph of Claire turned slightly away from the lamplight, because some nights her smile was more than he could bear. The shepherd shivered violently. Eli knelt beside the stove, fed it kindling, and struck his scratched silver Zippo. The flame rose small and blue gold, trembling at first, then steadying. Claire's lighter. Claire's joke gift from a summer flea market, back when she had said every brooding soldier needed one dramatic object for staring into the distance. He had laughed then. The memory entered without knocking. Eli closed the lighter and focused on the fire. When the stove began to breathe heat, he brought towels, warm water, and the emergency kit from under the sink. He cleaned the cuts as best he could. The shepherd watched every motion, too weak to resist, too proud to surrender. When he touched a deeper scrape near her paw, she huffed and lifted her head. "I know," he said. "I'm not enjoying it either." Her eyes narrowed. It was absurd, but Eli had the sudden impression she disapproved of his bedside manner. That almost pulled a smile from him. Almost. Only after she settled did he open the canvas bag. Inside were a second collar, cracked and dark with oil, a gray wool cloth, worn soft, a few torn service invoices for furnace repairs, the paper damp and wrinkled. A small metal tag scratched nearly smooth, with enough lettering left to read a name. Earl Donnelly. Eli knew Earl. Everyone around Ash River Crossing knew Earl Donnelly, whether they wanted to or not. 69 years old, furnace repairman, professional grumbler, enemy of cheap parts and lazy workmanship. He had fixed the church boiler twice and called it a mechanical insult to the Lord both times. He had also refused payment from half the elderly widows in town and pretended to forget sending them bills. Eli stared at the tag. Why was Earl's dog locked in a trailer? The shepherd's ears twitched at the name. Eli looked at her. She looked back, amber eyes dulled by exhaustion, but sharpened by something else. Not panic, expectation. As if she had delivered the first piece and was waiting for the slow human to understand that there were more. His phone had one bar by the kitchen window. He called Hannah Pike. She answered on the fourth ring, voice husky with sleep and alert by the second syllable of his name. Eli? I found a dog. A pause. You found a dog. In an overturned livestock trailer on the mine road, pregnant, hypothermic, cuts on the paws, possible abdominal bruising. The sleep vanished from her voice. How far along? I'm not a vet. No, you're a man who says obvious things under pressure. Is she contracting? I don't think so. You don't think? Hannah, I'm coming. The line clicked dead. Eli stood in the kitchen with the phone in his hand, hearing the storm drag its claws along the roof. Hannah arrived 34 minutes later in a cranberry parka dusted white, her veterinary bag slung over one shoulder and her brown hair tied low beneath a wool cap. She was 46, sharp-eyed, steady, with a face made gentle by grief and hard work rather than softness. Snow clung to her boots when she stepped inside. She took one look at the dog, then at Eli's blood-marked towels. You moved her carefully? Yes. Good. That single word from Hannah Pike felt uncomfortably like absolution. She knelt beside the shepherd and began working with calm precision. Temperature, gums, pulse, paw pads, belly. She spoke softly to the dog, not babying her, just letting each touch arrive with warning. The shepherd tolerated Hannah better than she had tolerated Eli, though she kept one paw close to the canvas bag. Working line build, Hannah murmured. Maybe 5, 6 years old, dehydrated, bruising, but I don't feel anything catastrophic. Pups are still moving. Eli did not realize he had been holding his breath until she said that. Hannah glanced up at him. You care? I found her. That wasn't what I asked. He looked toward the window. Hannah let the silence stand for a moment. She had known him too long to chase him through it. Her husband, Rowan Pike, had once dragged Eli out of a blown-open concrete room outside Fallujah while rounds cracked over both their heads. Rowan had died years later in another country, saving someone else. Hannah never mentioned the debt directly. She did not need to. Some debts sat in a room like a third person. She needs rest, Hannah said. Warmth, fluids. No stress if we can help it. I'll leave supplies. If labor starts early, call me immediately. The shepherd shifted, and the metal tag in the bag clicked softly against the floor. Hannah looked at the invoices. Earl Donnelly? That's what it says. Earl wouldn't abandon a dog. No. And nobody locks a pregnant shepherd in a livestock trailer by accident. Eli looked down at the dog. Her eyes were half closed now, but when he moved the bag slightly away from the stove's heat, she lifted her head. Easy, he said. The dog held his gaze. Hannah watched them both. Does she have a name? Not one I know. She'll need one while she's here. Eli almost said she was not staying. The words came up from habit, from the locked rooms inside him, from years of keeping every living need outside the walls before it could ask something of him. But the shepherd lay by his stove with torn paws and unborn pups, guarding the last belongings of a missing old man. She had been shut in steel and left to freeze. Still, she had protected the bag. Still, she had trusted him only after he promised not to take what mattered. Eli looked at the pale golden mark beneath her eye, like a drop of oil from Earl Donnelly's hands. He looked at Claire's Zippo on the table, at Hannah's wedding ring hanging on the chain beneath her collar, at the fire beginning to warm a room that had forgotten how to welcome anything fragile. "Mercy," he said. Hannah's expression changed, not into a smile exactly, but into something quieter. The shepherd blinked once, as if the name had weight, and she was deciding whether to accept it. "Mercy," Eli repeated, rougher this time. Her head lowered to the quilt. Her eyes stayed open. Far from the cabin, several miles south where the mine road met the highway, Darren Holt stood beneath the dead canopy of a closed gas station. He was 38, broad-handed, red stubble ruff along his jaw, wearing a North Star cap pulled low over tired gray eyes. His truck idled near the pumps, trailer hitch empty. He stared at his gloves. A smear of dried blood darkened the leather near the thumb. Darren had been told to move Earl Donnelly's dog out of town. That was all. A troublesome animal, they said. A dog that kept returning to places it should not. He had not known she was pregnant. He had not known the storm would blind the road, or that the trailer would fishtail near Larch Hollow, or that he would panic after cutting the hitch loose and driving away like a coward with his heart hammering in his throat. Now the trailer was gone from his mirror. The dog was gone from the trailer. Somewhere in the blizzard, a mistake had survived. Darren closed his fist around the stained glove. The storm kept moving across the iron range, whitening roofs, roads, sins, and footprints alike. But not everything buried by snow stayed buried. In a cedar cabin north of town, a man who had forgotten how to pray sat beside a pregnant German shepherd named Mercy while the fire slowly turned the room gold. Mercy did not recover like an animal grateful to be saved. She recovered like a soldier behind enemy lines. For the first 2 days, she slept in fragments near Eli Mercer's wood stove, her yellow and black body curled awkwardly around the heavy curve of her belly. Even unconscious, she kept one paw touching the oilcloth bag he had pulled from the trailer. If Eli moved it to clean the floor, her eyes opened. If he carried it to the table to check the papers again, her head rose. If the wind slammed the kitchen window, she placed herself between the bag and the door with the weary determination of a queen defending a ruined kingdom. Eli learned her rules because she left him no choice. Food bowl near the left side of the stove, not the right. Water warmed slightly, never cold from the pump. No sudden steps behind her, no dragging chairs across the floor, no touching the torn leather collar unless she could see his hands. No moving the gray wool cloth from the bag unless he wanted those amber eyes to accuse him of crimes not yet committed. He had once crossed black water in silence, read enemy movement from shadows, and measured danger by the angle of a half-open door. Now he was being trained by a pregnant German shepherd who disapproved of his housekeeping. "You know," he told her on the third morning, setting down a bowl of broth-soaked food, "most guests don't reorganize a man's life by glaring at him." Mercy sniffed the bowl, then looked at him. "Fine, most guests aren't carrying 6 pups and a mystery." She ate 3 careful mouthfuls, then stopped to check the bag again. The cabin had changed shape around her. Before Mercy, the house had been efficient, wood stacked by the door, tools in their places, one plate drying near the sink, one mug on the shelf, one chair at the table, with the other pushed in so far it had become more object than invitation. Eli had spent years making sure nothing in the room asked anything emotional of him. Mercy ruined that with a blanket nest, 3 towels, a chipped ceramic bowl, paw prints near the stove, and the persistent sound of breathing. Not loud breathing, not needy breathing, just the proof of another life occupying the room. That was what unsettled him most. Eli could handle injury. He could handle blood, cold, broken metal, the harsh arithmetic of keeping a body alive until someone better trained arrived. But Mercy did not simply need rescue. She needed continuation. She needed him to be present in the dull hours after the dramatic part was over, when heroics became laundry, broth, disinfectant, and patience. He had always been better at the door-bursting kind of mercy. The staying kind felt more dangerous. Hannah Pike came twice to check on Mercy. The second time, she arrived with fluids, nutritional supplements, and the expression of a woman prepared to scold both man and dog if either of them behaved foolishly. She found Eli kneeling beside Mercy's front paw with a clean bandage in one hand and a look of restrained negotiation on his face. "She doesn't like the wrap," Eli said. Hannah hung her cranberry parka on the back of a chair. "Most patients don't. She keeps pulling it loose. Have you tried telling her you're a decorated veteran and she should respect your authority?" Mercy huffed without lifting her head. Hannah looked at the dog. "She has an excellent point." Eli said nothing, but the corner of his mouth moved before he could stop it. Hannah saw. She was kind enough not to mention it. She knelt, examined Mercy's paws, checked her belly, and listened with calm attention. Her hands were competent and unhurried. That was one of the things Eli remembered from Rowan, her late husband. Not the same hands, not the same voice, but the same refusal to panic just because a situation deserved it. "The pups are still active," Hannah said. "That's good. She's stronger than she looked the first night, but don't let that fool you. Stress could push her into early labor. Keep everything quiet." Eli glanced around the cabin. "Quiet is one thing I can provide." Hannah's eyes softened, not with pity, which he would have hated, but with recognition. "Quiet isn't always rest." The words landed too close. Eli reached for the kettle and turned away. "Coffee?" "I'll take that as your way of changing the subject." "It's also coffee." She accepted the mug because Hannah was practical before she was offended. While she drank, Mercy shifted in her nest. A low, distant rumble moved through the walls. At first, Eli thought it was wind. Then Mercy's head snapped up. Her body went rigid. Her ears locked toward the road beyond the trees. The rumble deepened, mechanical and heavy. A fuel truck passing on the ridge route, unseen through the snow-dim morning but clear enough in the frozen air. Mercy tried to stand. Her paws slid on the quilt. Eli moved toward her, but she backed away, fast and clumsy, knocking the water bowl sideways. Her breath turned sharp. Her eyes fixed on the kitchen door, not as if she wanted to run through it, but as if something might come through it first. "Mercy," Eli said quietly. She growled, not at him, at the sound. The truck rolled farther down the ridge, engine fading. Still, Mercy pressed herself into the narrow corner between the stove box and the wood bin, belly heaving, body trembling with a fear too specific to be ordinary. Hannah set her mug down. "That wasn't random." "No." "Fuel truck?" "Sounded like one." Mercy stared at the door long after the engine was gone. Eli looked at the oilcloth bag on the floor. Earl Donnelly's scratched metal tag lay on top now, catching dull light from the window. Hannah followed his gaze. Earl worked on furnaces, fuel companies, service calls. And now his dog panics at fuel trucks. His pregnant dog, Hannah said, who was locked in a trailer and dumped on a mine road. Eli did not answer. The room had become warmer, but the story inside it had gone colder. Later that afternoon, Hannah left with instructions Eli did not need repeated, but listened to anyway. Mercy slept for most of the evening, spent from fear. Eli sat at the table with Earl's invoices spread in front of him. The papers were torn, damp, and half ruined, but enough remained to trouble him. Names, dates, service codes, notes written in Earl's cramped hand. M. Rowe, second valve failure after North Star inspection. C. Ames, pressure irregularity, part recently replaced, cheap import. L. Sutter, warned about property safety? Ask Amos. Same pattern, not weather, not age. Follow the heat. Eli read the last phrase 3 times. Follow the heat. He almost called the sheriff. Then he stopped. It was not reluctance to involve law. Eli had no romance with handling things alone, but a handful of damaged invoices, a frightened dog, and a missing repairman were not yet a case. They were smoke. Smoke mattered. Smoke meant fire existed somewhere. But walking into town and saying so too early could scatter whoever had made it. He folded the papers and put them back into the bag. Mercy watched him. "You know where Earl is?" he asked. Her eyes did not change. That would be convenient. She blinked slowly, as if convenience was a human superstition. By the 4th morning, the storm had loosened its grip enough for the world to show edges again. Snow still loaded the pines, and the creek behind the cabin remained sealed under milky ice, but the sky had cleared into a hard blue that made every drift glitter. Eli brought in wood, checked the truck, and told himself he was only stepping outside for air when Mercy rose from her blanket. She moved stiffly, but with purpose. "No," he said. She crossed the room. "Absolutely not." She reached the door and looked back at him. Her torn ear tilted, her belly hung low and heavy, her bandaged paw touched the floor as lightly as she could manage. There was nothing dramatic in her expression, no mystical certainty, no command from heaven through a dog's eyes. Only a tired, pregnant animal asking for the one thing she could not do alone. Eli stood by the stove with a split log in his hand. He thought of Claire in the final months, saying she was fine. He thought of all the times people had needed him and had hidden the full truth because they did not want to interrupt his duty. He thought of himself returning to a house already filled with flowers and casseroles and condolences, too late to be useful. Mercy scratched once at the door. Not urgently. Politely, almost. That broke something in him more effectively than desperation would have. "All right," he said, setting the log down. "But if Hannah asks, this was your idea." Mercy waited while he packed the bag, a blanket, water, and a leash she clearly considered ceremonial. Outside, she stepped carefully into the snow, sniffed the air, and turned not toward the woods or the ridge road, but south, toward Ash River Crossing, toward Earl Donnelly's place. The drive took longer than it should have. Mercy stood braced in the back seat, nose near the cracked window, ignoring every bump except when the truck passed a North Star fuel tanker parked near the town garage. The instant she saw the blue and white logo, she lowered herself behind the seat and began shaking. Eli slowed. The tanker was empty, engine off. A man in a Navy work coat stood beside it, smoking with one shoulder turned against the wind. He looked toward Eli's truck, then looked away too quickly. Mercy's growl was almost inaudible. Eli kept driving. Earl Donnelly's house sat at the edge of town near a yard, stacked with firewood, broken furnace panels, and metal parts no sane man would keep unless he believed every object deserved one more chance. The house was small, white once, but weathered gray, with a porch that sagged at the left corner and a chimney that should have been smoking. It was not. That bothered Eli more than the unlocked gate. Earl Donnelly without chimney smoke was like a church without a door. Mercy became still when the truck stopped. Not calm, still. There was a difference. Eli clipped the leash to her collar, mostly to satisfy the idea of caution, and helped her down. She did not go to the front porch. She pulled him around back. The snow behind the house had drifted deep against the mudroom steps, but someone had passed through recently enough to leave compressed marks beneath the newer powder. Mercy lowered her nose, sniffed once, then climbed the steps with effort and lay down in front of the back door. She placed her body against it, not scratching, not barking, refusing to leave. Eli tried the knob, unlocked. The kitchen beyond was cold. Not abandoned cabin cold, not old house draft cold. The wrong kind. A house that should have held some trace of its owner's heat, but had been emptied of it. "Earl?" Eli called. No answer. He stepped inside with Mercy behind him. The smell hit first. Cold ashes, oil, dust, and something metallic. The kitchen table held a mug with coffee dried at the bottom. A loaf of bread sat on the counter, hard as a brick. One chair had been knocked sideways. Mercy moved past the kitchen, slow but certain. The living room was cluttered with old manuals, furnace parts, and stacks of newspapers bundled with twine. A pair of reading glasses lay broken near the rug. Eli crouched and touched the floor beside them. No fresh blood. But the dust had been disturbed by dragging feet or a struggle clumsy enough to leave marks. Mercy gave a low sound from the hallway. Eli found her in the utility room. The furnace panel had been removed. Tools lay scattered across the floor: socket wrench, pliers, voltage meter, a flashlight with a cracked lens. A section of pipe had been loosened. Near the workbench, a drawer hung open, its contents spilled. Receipts, carbon copies, service forms, and parts tags littered the floor like a paper storm. Mercy lay down beside the furnace, panting hard, her eyes fixed on the open panel. Eli saw the old cursing shape of Earl Donnelly in the room, a man on his knees before machinery, muttering insults at bad workmanship, writing notes because something did not sit right. He saw, too, the absence of him. No coat on the hook, no boots by the mat, no dog bowl filled, no furnace running in the house of the best furnace man in town. Eli began gathering papers. He did not take everything. He photographed first, the way years of discipline taught him. Wide shot, close shot, dates, names, service codes, torn edges. Then he picked up the notebook lying half under the workbench. Its cover was black, stiff with grime. Inside, Earl's handwriting crawled across the pages in angry slants. North Star inspection, 3 days before failure. Same replacement valve, same batch number. Mavis Rowe says man told her house unsafe. Who? Clifford paid twice. No record in subsidy ledger? Lorraine signed something she couldn't read. Get Amos. If this is what I think it is, they're not fixing heat. They're pricing loneliness. Eli read the last line twice. They're pricing loneliness. The sentence felt less like evidence than a hand closing around his throat. Mercy pressed her muzzle against his boot. He looked down. She was trembling again, but not from the cold. Her eyes had shifted toward the workbench. Beneath it, caught behind a paint can, was a torn strip of blue and white service label. North Star Heating and Fuel. Eli knew the company. Everyone did. North Star had begun decades ago as a heating cooperative, the sort of practical civic promise northern towns built when winter could kill without malice. But under Grant Vay, it had become cleaner, richer, more efficient, and more visible. Grant sponsored snowplow repairs, donated to the church furnace fund, bought ads in the winter festival program, and shook hands like a man blessing himself. He was also Claire's cousin. That fact rose in Eli with an old, unwelcome ache. Grant at their kitchen table years ago, praising Claire's wild rice soup. Grant bringing flowers when her treatments began. Grant standing at the funeral in a black wool coat, telling Eli, "Family remains, even when grief makes strangers of us." Eli had hated him for saying something so polished beside a grave. Now, holding Earl Donnelly's notebook in a dead-cold utility room, he wondered whether polish had always been the point. Mercy gave a low whine. Eli closed the notebook. "We're going to Amos." Sheol, the church basement, smelled of coffee, floor wax, and old stone. Amos Bell met him at the side door with a ring of keys hanging from his belt and a mug in one hand. The pastor was tall and lean, with white hair that refused discipline and a short silver beard that made him look like a prophet who had misplaced his camel. His dark eyes went first to Mercy, then to the oilcloth bag in Eli's hand. "Well," Amos said, "that is not the face of a man bringing good news. I found Earl's dog. I can see that. And Earl's house is cold." The humor left Amos gently, like a candle being covered. He led them downstairs. The basement was warmer than the nave above it. Folding cots leaned against one wall. Wool blankets were stacked in labeled crates. Canned soup filled 2 shelves. A kerosene heater sat beside the backup generator Eli had repaired. 3 coffee urns stood on a long table, clean and ready. Mercy lowered herself beside Eli's boot, exhausted by the trip, but her head remained on the oilcloth bag. Eli looked around. "You've been expecting trouble." "I've been expecting winter," Amos said. "Trouble is just winter with paperwork." Eli set Earl's notebook on the table. Amos put on reading glasses and went through the pages slowly. He did not interrupt. He did not make the mistake of looking shocked too early. When he reached Lorraine Sutter's name, his mouth tightened. "She came to me last week," he said. "Said a man from North Star told her the house might be condemned if she didn't accept a relocation assistance agreement. She thought it was charity." "It wasn't?" "I asked to see the paper. She forgot to bring it, or was ashamed. Sometimes shame has a better memory than people do." Amos turned another page. "Mavis Rowe stopped coming to Wednesday supper. Said she was saving gas. Mavis lives 6 blocks away." Eli stared at the crates of blankets. "How long?" "Long enough that I should have pushed harder." "That's not an answer." "No," Amos said. "It's a confession." For a while, only the generator hummed softly in the corner. Eli looked at the notebook again. "Grant Vay runs North Star." "Yes." "You know he's Claire's cousin." "I know." "You think that matters?" Amos closed the notebook with both hands resting on the cover. "I think grief makes some names heavier than others. I also think Cole does not care who your cousin was." That struck clean. Not cruelly, cleanly. Eli looked down at Mercy. She had fallen asleep with her chin on the oilcloth bag, but one paw still touched the notebook as if Earl's words belonged to her, too. Amos followed his gaze. She was Earl's? Looks that way. Then Earl wouldn't have left her, not willingly. The pastor took off his glasses. He once spent 40 minutes lecturing me because I bought the wrong furnace filter. Said if I planned to murder machinery, I should at least do it honestly. Despite himself, Eli exhaled something close to a laugh. Amos smiled faintly. There he is. Don't start. I wouldn't dream of it. Eli gathered the papers again, but Amos placed a hand on the notebook. Leave me copies, not originals, copies. You already have a copier down here? I have a copier, 3 coffee urns, 6 snow shovels, and 1 retired school bus driver who owes me a favor. The Lord provides in very specific forms. Eli looked around the basement, at the blankets, the soup, the cots, the generator waiting like a sleeping beast. The room no longer looked like storage. It looked like a lifeboat built before the flood. Mercy slept under the table, belly rising and falling, the little metal furnace tag on her collar ticking softly when she breathed. Eli understood then that the overturned trailer had not brought trouble into his life. It had brought him to the edge of trouble already surrounding everyone else. He had thought Mercy was the one pulled from the wreck, but Earl was gone. Old people were sitting in cold houses. Amos had been preparing a shelter without saying the word shelter because pride could freeze a person nearly as fast as weather. And somewhere behind service forms and friendly donations, someone had learned how to turn heat into leverage. Eli looked at Amos. You think Earl found proof? I think Earl found enough to scare someone. And Mercy? Amos glanced under the table, where the pregnant dog slept with one torn ear tilted toward their voices. I think she carried what he could not. Outside, snow began falling again, softer than before. It brushed the church windows in pale strokes, as if the sky were trying to erase the town, one pane at a time. Eli put Earl's notebook into the oilcloth bag and tightened the strap. Mercy opened her eyes. Not fully. Just enough to make sure he still had it. "I've got it," he told her. For once, saying the words did not feel like a promise he was unqualified to keep. They did not begin like investigators. That mattered to Amos Bell. "People open doors to neighbors," the pastor said that morning, standing in the church basement with a thermos under one arm and a crate of soup cans at his feet. "They close them on accusations." Eli Mercer said nothing, but he understood the wisdom of it. A man with his shoulders, his face, and his habit of standing too still could turn concern into interrogation without meaning to. He had spent half his life entering rooms where someone had already decided he was dangerous. He did not want old women in cold kitchens to look at him that way. So they packed like neighbors. Amos brought soup, bread, and that impossible ring of church keys at his belt, jingling like a small brass choir whenever he moved. Hannah Pike brought a medical bag, not for animals this time, though Mercy's supplies were tucked into one side. Eli loaded split wood, a portable space heater, extension cords, and the black notebook of Earl Donnelly's copied pages, sealed in a plastic folder. Mercy came because Mercy refused not to. Hannah argued first. The German Shepherd was still recovering, still heavy with pups, and every trip outside carried risk. Mercy listened to the whole lecture from beside the church basement door, her torn ear tilted, amber eyes steady, belly low, one bandaged paw placed directly on the oilcloth bag as if she were signing her own release form. "She needs rest," Hannah said. Mercy looked at Eli. Eli looked at Hannah. "I'm not winning this one," he said. "You're not trying very hard." "I know when I'm outranked." Amos gave a solemn nod. "Expectant mothers have senior command authority." Hannah sighed, which meant she had lost but intended to blame both of them later. The first house sat near the old rail line, where the tracks vanished under snow, and only the crossing sign remained, its red paint faded to the color of dried berries. Mavis Rowe lived alone in a narrow yellow house with a leaning porch and curtains so clean they looked like they had been washed out of pride rather than habit. She answered after Amos knocked twice. Mavis was small, white-haired, and wrapped in so many layers she seemed to have dressed herself out of a cedar chest. Blue cardigan over brown sweater, shawl over cardigan, fingerless gloves over hands that had gone pale at the knuckles. Her smile appeared quickly, too quickly, the way people smiled when they wanted visitors to leave before noticing anything. "Pastor," she said. "I'm fine." Amos lifted the thermos. "That is a terrible greeting for soup." "I don't need soup." "Nobody needs soup. That's why it's merciful." Her eyes moved to Eli, then to Hannah, then stopped on Mercy standing in the snow behind them. Mercy did not push forward. She simply stood there, breathing softly in the cold, her dark saddle dusted with fresh flakes, her pregnant belly making her look both vulnerable and impossible to dismiss. Mavis's face changed. "Oh, honey," she whispered, "you shouldn't be out in this." She opened the door wider for the dog. That was how they entered. Inside, the house was tidy and far too cold, the kind of cold that hid behind politeness. Not freezing, not visibly desperate, just a thin, steady chill that had settled into the wallpaper, the floorboards, the ceramic angels on the windowsill. A tea kettle sat on the stove, unused. The furnace vent gave no heat. A small electric heater hummed near Mavis's chair, working so hard its plastic casing smelled faintly warm. Eli noticed the signs without moving his face. Blanket folded over the armchair. 2 pairs of socks drying near the heater. Mail stacked unopened beneath a ceramic rooster. A North Star heating and fuel invoice held down by a salt shaker on the kitchen table. Mercy walked to Mavis and rested her head gently on the woman's knee. Mavis put one trembling hand between the dog's ears. "Aren't you something?" "She's called Mercy," Amos said. "That's a dangerous name," Mavis murmured. "Makes a person admit they need some." No one answered too quickly. Hannah asked about the temperature in the house, using the same voice she used with injured animals and stubborn farmers. Mavis deflected. She was managing. She was used to northern winters. She had blankets. The furnace was old, but old things were allowed to complain. Then Mercy shifted closer, pressing her warm body against the woman's shins. Mavis looked down. Her mouth tightened, not with anger, with defeat. "They came twice," she said quietly. "North Star. First time, a young man changed a valve. Second time, another one said the whole system was unsafe. Bill went from something I could stretch to something that made me sit down." She gave a small, embarrassed laugh, as if sitting changes numbers. Eli looked at the invoice. 3 times the normal labor cost, emergency diagnostic fee, subsidy adjustment pending, safety relocation consultation. "Did they explain that last line?" Hannah asked. Mavis nodded, eyes still on Mercy. "Said if the house kept failing inspection, the county might decide I couldn't stay alone. Said there was a program, a company that helped older homeowners move before something bad happened." Amos's face had gone still. "What company?" Eli asked. Mavis hesitated, then reached into a drawer and took out a folded brochure. On the front was a smiling couple standing outside a neat winter cabin. "Vay Properties, Safe Transitions for Northern Living." Eli did not touch it at first. Grant's name was not on the cover. It did not need to be. The Vay in the title stood there like a handprint. They left Mavis with soup, extra wood, and Amos's promise that the church would send someone to check the furnace properly. Mavis tried to refuse the wood. June Haskell was not there, but Amos somehow channeled her spirit and told Mavis that refusing firewood in January was an insult to trees who had worked hard all their lives. Mavis accepted 2 bundles. Mercy, before leaving, pressed her nose to Mavis's hand once more. The second house belonged to Clifford Ames, though calling it a house felt too delicate. It was a squat miner's place near the slag ridge, built of dark timber and stubbornness. Smoke leaked from an old coal stovepipe, bending sideways in the wind. The front yard held a rusted ore cart full of split logs. A sign beside the porch read, "No salesman, no surveys, no nonsense." Clifford opened the door only after Amos knocked, and Eli stood back where he could be seen as useful but not threatening. The old man had shoulders like a collapsed bridge, broad but bowed. His beard was white and square, his eyes watery from age and coal smoke. A cough rattled in his chest before he managed his first words. "I already told North Star to go marry a porcupine." Amos smiled. "We are not North Star. Pastors are worse. They bring casseroles and questions." "I brought neither." Clifford squinted past him. "You brought a dog." Mercy stood under the porch roof, snow melting along her black saddle. Her belly was obvious. Clifford frowned. "Pregnant?" Hannah nodded. "Very." "Well, don't stand there freezing her. Get in before she has pups in my doorway and blames me." That was how Clifford Ames surrendered. His house smelled of coal smoke, old leather, and peppermint lozenges. The furnace in the basement had been shut off. Clifford claimed he preferred the stove. Hannah listened to his lungs for less than a minute before giving Eli a look that said the preference was killing him slowly. Clifford hated paperwork more than he hated visitors, but after 10 minutes of grumbling, he produced a folder from beneath a stack of mining magazines. Inside were inspection reports, repair notices, and a purchase offer from Vay Properties. Unlike Mavis, Clifford had circled words he disliked in red pencil, then written insults beside them. "Unsafe occupancy risk, says man who can't hold wrench right. Deferred maintenance, replaced same part twice. Thieves." Compassionate relocation. Buzzard language. Eli almost respected the annotations more than the documents. You paid twice for the same repair, Hannah said. Paid once, Clifford said. Second time they said subsidy covered the rest. Did it? He looked away. That answer had no sound. Amos sat at the kitchen table across from him. Clifford. The old miner's jaw worked. Man gets tired of not understanding things. They give you numbers, forms, words long enough to need boots. You nod because asking again feels like admitting you've gotten too old to own your own life. The coal stove popped. Mercy, who had been lying near the door, rose slowly and crossed the room. She rested her chin on Clifford's boot. The old man looked down as if she had placed a medal there. I fixed drills bigger than pickup trucks, he said, voice rougher. 40 years underground. Now some boy with clean gloves tells me my house is too much for me. Eli felt the words land somewhere private. He had believed his own loneliness was self-made, a fortress of choice. But in Clifford's kitchen he saw another kind. Loneliness imposed by shame, by forms, by the slow theft of confidence. A man could live through cave-ins, lung dust, and 50 winters, then be made small by a clipboard. For the first time that day, Eli did not reach for a solution. He sat down. Not for long. Just enough. Clifford noticed. So did Amos. So did Hannah. Mercy closed her eyes against the old man's boot. The third house belonged to Lorraine Sutter, and by then the day had lost its clean morning brightness. Clouds gathered over the treetops. Snow began again in small flakes, not storm snow yet, just a warning. Lorraine lived in a blue house near the frozen creek, with wind chimes made from old spoons hanging by the porch. She was in her late 70s, tall and thin, wearing a lavender sweater under a coat indoors. Her hair was pinned carefully, but 2 strands had escaped near her temples. She greeted Amos warmly, Hannah politely, and Eli with the wary kindness people saved for wounded animals and quiet men. Mercy was not able to climb the steps without help. Eli bent and lifted her carefully. For a second, the dog leaned her full weight into him, trusting because she had no better option. That brief wait altered something in the day. Eli had carried her from wreckage, but this was different. There was no storm screaming, no bent metal, no urgency to hide behind. Just a living creature allowing herself to be helped in front of other people. Hannah saw his face and said nothing. Inside, Lorraine's house was warmer than the others, but only in one room. The rest had been closed off with blankets hung over doorways. Her dining table had become a battlefield of envelopes, reading glasses, pill bottles, and a yellow legal pad covered in careful notes. I thought I signed for assistance, Lorraine said, after Amos explained why they had come. I thought it was a winter repair grant. Hannah sat beside her, not across. May I look? Lorraine pushed the papers over as if surrendering evidence against herself. The document was worse than the others. Partial equity transfer, deferred occupancy review, maintenance lien, right of first refusal, legal phrases dressed like winter charity. Eli stood near the doorway, reading over Hannah's shoulder. His throat tightened as he understood. Lorraine had not sold her house outright. Not yet. She had signed away enough of it to make losing the rest easier. They said if I didn't sign, Lorraine whispered, the repairs couldn't be covered. And if the repairs weren't covered, the county might decide I was unsafe here. Her eyes filled, but her voice stayed controlled. My husband died in that back room. I know that sounds foolish, wanting to stay because of a room. No, Eli said. Everyone looked at him. He had not meant to speak. Lorraine's eyes met his. Eli looked toward the blanket covering the hallway. It doesn't sound foolish. The room held that for a moment. Hannah asked about medication, sleep, whether Lorraine had been warm enough at night. Lorraine began with pride. Then Mercy shifted from the rug and placed her head in the woman's lap, careful and heavy. Lorraine's fingers sank into the fur between Mercy's ears. "I sleep in my coat," she said, "only when the wind comes from the creek." Eli turned toward the window. Outside, snow gathered on the sill. Soft, bright, innocent-looking. The same snow lay over Mavis's rail line, Clifford's coal bucket, Earl's empty house, the mine road where Mercy had nearly died. It made everything beautiful enough to ignore. That was the cruelty of it. Not that winter was harsh. Everyone here knew winter was harsh. The cruelty was that some people had learned to hide inside it. When they returned to the church, the basement felt less like a precaution and more like an answer waiting for a question people were too ashamed to ask. Amos spread the copied documents across a folding table. Hannah organized them by household. Eli wrote names and dates on a legal pad in his blocky, disciplined hand. Mercy lay beneath the table, exhausted from the visits, her breathing deep, the metal furnace tag on her collar ticking softly when it touched the floor. Mavis Rowe, Clifford Ames, Lorraine Sutter, Earl Donnelly, North Star inspection before failure, inflated repair, safety warning, Vay Properties contact. The pattern did not shout. It did something worse. It repeated. Hannah stood with her hands braced on the back of a chair, staring at the papers. "This is how they do it." Amos looked up. "Carefully?" "Politely," she said. Eli understood. North Star had not stolen heat like a thief breaking a window. It had entered through trust, through service calls, through subsidy programs, through forms printed on clean paper. It had turned warmth into leverage, then dressed the leverage in concern. Hannah tapped one of Lorraine's papers. "After Rowan died, I nearly lost the clinic." Eli looked at her. She did not look back. She kept her eyes on the documents, perhaps because the story was easier to tell to paper. Insurance delay, veterans' survivor benefits tangled with clinic debt. A bank officer told me I needed to be realistic. That was his word, realistic. Her mouth tightened. He meant smaller. He meant grateful. He meant I should stop asking questions because grief had made me inconvenient. Amos listened with the quiet of a man receiving confession without stealing ownership of it. Hannah drew a slow breath. People think cruelty is always loud. Sometimes it just gives you a form you're too tired to read. Eli said, "Rowan would have hated that." Now she looked at him. The air changed, not dramatically, but enough. For years, Rowan Pike had existed between them as a debt Eli carried and Hannah did not name. Hearing Eli speak of him not as a wound, not as a transaction of saved life, but as a man who would have hated injustice, gave Rowan back a little shape. Hannah's eyes softened. "He would have hated the cheap valves more," she said. Amos nodded gravely. "A righteous man." Eli almost smiled. Then a sound came from upstairs. Not loud, the side door closing. Amos straightened. The church was usually quiet on winter afternoons, except for the old radiators, the wind, and Amos's habit of talking to furniture when it failed him. A visitor without knocking did not alarm him, but it changed the room. Eli gathered the papers into one stack by instinct. Hannah noticed and covered Lorraine's contract with a medical folder. Footsteps crossed the floor above. Slow, hesitant. Amos went up first. Eli followed at a distance, not because Amos needed protection, but because Eli had long ago learned not to let older men face unknown footsteps alone. In the side vestibule stood a woman in a plum-colored puffer coat, snow melting on her shoulders. She was small, early to mid-40s, with a brown bob tucked behind one ear and a canvas tote clutched so tightly the fabric twisted in her hands. Her face had the washed-out look of someone who worked under fluorescent lights and slept badly. Behind her glasses, her dark eyes moved from Amos to Eli and then quickly away. "Pastor Bell," she said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know if anyone was here." "Nora," Amos said, gentle but careful. Eli knew the name from the documents before he placed the face. Nora Whitlake, North Star Accounting. She saw recognition pass through him and flinched as if he had raised his voice. "I'm not here for trouble," she said. "People usually aren't," Amos replied. "Trouble has a way of arriving separately." Her hands tightened on the tote. "My mother's on the reduced fuel list," Nora said. "She doesn't know I came." Amos waited. Nora looked toward the basement stairs. Mercy had come up silently behind Eli, slow but determined. At the sight of the dog, Nora's face changed, with something like guilt sharpened into fear. "That's Earl's dog," Eli said. "Yes." "Is she—" Nora swallowed. "Is she all right?" "For now." The answer seemed to hurt her. She looked at Amos again. "If someone waited too long to say something, is there still a point?" The church seemed to grow very still around the question. Amos did not answer with comfort too quickly. He studied Nora the way he studied a cracked beam or a grieving widow, not judging the damage, but measuring what could still hold. "If you're asking," he said, "then your conscience hasn't frozen solid yet." Nora's eyes filled, though no tears fell. She did not hand over files. She did not confess. She did not become brave in one clean motion. She only nodded once, as if the sentence had given her enough heat to survive the next hour. "I need to think," she whispered. Then she left the church as quietly as she had entered. Eli watched through the narrow window as she crossed the snowy walk to a small sedan. The car sat idling crookedly by the curb. Nora got inside, but did not drive away at once. She lowered her head over the steering wheel. Mercy stood beside Eli, her body tired, her torn ear angled toward the door. "She knows something," Eli said. Amos's keys gave one soft chime as he shifted beside him. "Yes," the pastor said. "The question is whether she knows it loudly enough." Downstairs, Hannah was already waiting by the table, one hand resting on the stack of papers as if afraid they might vanish. Eli looked at the documents. At Mercy? At the stairs where Nora had stood. The day had begun with soup and neighborly visits. It ended with a pattern, a frightened accountant, and the dawning knowledge that the Cold and Ash River crossing had been engineered by people who understood shame better than weather. Outside, the snow kept falling. This time, Eli did not think it looked holy. He thought it looked like evidence being covered. The second storm did not announce itself with drama. It arrived like a debt collector. By late afternoon, the sky over Ash River crossing had lowered into a hard, bruised gray. Snow began with small flakes, almost polite, then thickened until the town square blurred behind a white veil. The old rail line disappeared. The frozen creek vanished beneath drifting powder. Roof lines softened. Chimneys smoked harder. Every porch light became a small, stubborn star trying not to be swallowed. Then the wind came. It struck from the north with a force that made houses creak in their bones. Pine branches cracked in the dark woods beyond town. Somewhere along County Road 18, a transformer blew with a blue-white flash that lit the sky for one sharp second. After that, the lights began to die. Not all at once. One street first, then another. Then the hardware store sign. Then the lamps along the church walk. Across Ash River Crossing, windows went black one by one, as if a giant hand were pinching out candles. In the church basement, Amos Bell stood under the emergency light and listened to the generator cough awake. "Good," he said to the machine. "I knew you had one honest sermon left in you." Eli Mercer was already moving. He did not need Amos to explain what the blackout meant. The houses they had visited yesterday had been cold with electricity still running. Without power, without functioning furnaces, without safe backup heat, those houses would become boxes, holding old breath and stubborn pride. Winter did not have to break a window to enter. Sometimes it waited for a switch to fail. Hannah Pike set medical supplies on a folding table. Blood pressure cuff, pulse oximeter, emergency blankets, inhalers, a small oxygen tank she had borrowed from the clinic, and a plastic bin of veterinary supplies for Mercy. Her hair was tied low, strands escaping near her cheeks, and she worked with the controlled speed of someone who had learned that panic wasted heat. Mercy lay near the kerosene heater, belly heavy, paws tucked beneath her. She lifted her head when the generator steadied. The golden mark beneath her right eye caught the basement light like a small drop of fire. "She shouldn't be in the middle of this," Hannah said. Eli pulled on his canvas jacket. "Nobody should." "That's not an argument." "No, it is, unfortunately, true." Above them, the church bell began to ring. Amos had gone up the narrow stairs and pulled the rope by hand. The bell was old, not large, but its voice cut through the snow with a raw, urgent clang. Not Sunday, not wedding, not funeral. A warning, a call, a shepherd's shout into the white dark. Eli paused at the door. The sound struck something old in him. Bells had rung after Claire's funeral, slow, formal, useless. This bell was different. It did not mourn what had happened. It demanded that something happen now. Amos came back down, breathless and red-cheeked. "I hope the Lord appreciates cardio." "He does," Hannah said. "Probably more than you do." Eli lifted his keys. "I'll get Mavis first, then Clifford. Lorraine, if the creek road is passable." "Take blankets," Hannah said, "and don't let Clifford talk you into leaving him there." "He'll try." "Then tell him Mercy outranks him." Mercy gave a low huff, not lifting her head. Amos pointed toward the church pantry. "June's on her way." Eli stopped. "June Haskell?" As if there's another woman in town who would hear emergency shelter and arrive with soup before law enforcement. As if summoned by insult and prophecy, the side door banged open upstairs. A woman's voice cut through the stairwell. "If someone has put the coffee urns on the same circuit as the heater, I will personally meet Jesus tonight and file a complaint." June Haskell descended with the force of a warm weather system. She was 57, round-cheeked, bright-eyed, honey-blonde hair threaded with silver, and pinned under a red knit hat dusted with flour. She wore a sage-green sweater under a cream apron, a puffer coat hanging open despite the cold, and carried two enormous covered pots as if they were holy relics. Behind her, a lanky man from the diner struggled in with bread crates and a crate of paper cups. June looked at Eli. "Don't stand there looking tragic. Go fetch people." For the first time all day, Eli did exactly what he was told. The roads were worse than he expected. Snow shoved at the truck from both sides. The headlights caught only white movement and the occasional ghost of a fence post. He found Mavis Rowe already sitting in her front room wearing her coat, trying to convince herself she had only been waiting for the power to return. When Eli knocked, she opened the door with a flashlight in one hand and embarrassment in her eyes. "I was just about to make tea," she said. "Good," Eli answered. "Make it at the church." She tried to argue. Mercy had not come with him, but he used her anyway. "Mercy's there," he said. "She'll worry if you don't come." Mavis frowned. "That dog barely knows me." "She has strong opinions." It worked. Clifford Ames took more effort. He opened his door in a wool cap and 2 sweaters, the coal stove smoking behind him like a dragon with lung disease. "I'm not sleeping in a church basement," he said. Eli looked past him at the stovepipe, then at the old miner's gray lips. "You can sit there and argue with Amos. I can argue here." "There's soup there." Clifford hesitated. "And Mercy." The old man cursed under his breath, then reached for his coat. That dog is becoming a public menace." Eli helped him into the truck without commenting on how hard Clifford leaned on his arm. By the time they reached Lorraine Sutter's blue house near the creek, the wind had risen to a howl. She had been sitting beside a candle with her hands folded around a cup of water gone cold. When she saw Eli, she did not pretend as much as the others. She only said, "I was hoping someone would come before I had to admit I needed someone." That sentence stayed with him all the way back to the church. The basement filled slowly, then all at once. People came with apologies, with plastic bags of medication, with blankets folded too neatly, with flashlights, walkers, pill boxes, oxygen tubes, stubbornness, shame, and the brittle humor of those who had survived too long to enjoy being rescued. They said they were only staying an hour. They said their houses would warm up soon. They said others needed the space more. June answered each excuse with soup. "Sit," she told Mavis. "Your pride can stand if it needs exercise." To Clifford, she said, "If you cough like that near my bread, I'm charging rent." To Lorraine, softer, "I saved you a corner away from the draft." Amos moved among them with blankets and bad jokes. Hannah checked hands for frostnip, listened to lungs, noted medications, coaxed water into people who claimed coffee counted. Eli carried cots, fixed a heater valve, shoveled the stairwell twice, and learned that the act of helping many people left no time to retreat from any one of them. Mercy watched from her nest near the heater. At first, people kept their distance. She was large, black, and gold, her torn ear giving her a battle-worn look, her pregnant belly making her seem sacred and fragile at the same time. Then Mavis asked if she could sit near the dog. Mercy lifted her head. Mavis lowered herself onto a folding chair beside her, slow and careful. "I won't bother you, sweetheart." Mercy placed her muzzle on the edge of Mavis's boot. That was all it took. An hour later, half the room had found reasons to pass by the dog. A retired bookkeeper scratched behind her good ear and confessed she had signed a maintenance waiver without reading it because her glasses were broken. A widower named Glenn admitted he had turned his furnace off each afternoon to save the voucher money. Clifford sat near Mercy with his arms folded, pretending not to care when she shifted closer to his chair. The basement became less like a shelter and more like a confession wearing wool socks. Eli stood near the stairwell and listened, not because he wanted evidence, because for once he understood that listening could be a form of repair. He heard the same phrases again and again. "I didn't want to bother anyone. They said it was just a form. I thought I misunderstood. I didn't want folks thinking I couldn't manage." Each sentence was another board removed from the wall North Star had built around them. Hannah came to stand beside him, arms crossed against the chill. "You're quiet," she said. "I'm usually quiet." "This is different." He watched June threaten a man with extra soup. "I thought cold made people ask for help." "Sometimes it makes them hide." Claire hid how bad it was, he said before he could stop himself. Hannah did not turn toward him too sharply. That was one of her mercies. "She loved you," she said. "That doesn't make the lie easier." "No, but it changes what the lie was trying to do." Eli looked down at his hands. "Protect me." "Maybe. I didn't ask to be protected." "Neither did they," Hannah said, nodding toward the room. The word struck him quietly. Mavis, Clifford, Lorraine, Claire. Different wars, different rooms. The same terrible instinct to suffer privately so love would not become burden. For a moment, Eli felt the basement tilt beneath a weight he could not name. He had spent years angry that Claire had not told him the full truth. Now, surrounded by people wrapped in blankets, he saw the other side of silence. Not forgiveness yet, not peace, but a crack in the old verdict. Then the side door opened upstairs. Cold rolled down the stairwell ahead of the voices. Amos looked up. Grant Vey descended as if the basement had been expecting him. He wore a black wool coat too elegant for the storm, a navy scarf, polished winter boots, and leather gloves that had never repaired anything. Snow rested on his silver blonde hair in a way that made him look composed rather than weathered. Behind him came two North Star employees carrying boxes marked Emergency Fuel Donation. One was heavy-set, red-faced, and irritated by the stares. The other was younger, narrow-shouldered, with nervous eyes and a Navy North Star cap pulled low. Grant smiled at the room. It was a beautiful smile, if one did not ask it to be warm. "Pastor Bell," he said, "I heard you opened the basement. North Star wanted to help." June, who had been ladling soup, muttered, "How generous of the fox to bring feathers." Amos stepped forward. "We appreciate supplies when they come without strings." Grant's smile did not move. In weather like this, strings are less important than heat. His eyes found Eli. For half a second, something almost familial crossed his face. Then he approached with open arms, as if they were meeting at a holiday dinner, rather than a basement full of people his company had helped freeze. "Eli," Grant said softly, "my God, it's been too long." Eli did not embrace him. Grant adjusted smoothly, placing a gloved hand on Eli's shoulder instead. "Claire would be glad to see you helping people." The name entered the room like a blade wrapped in silk. Eli felt every muscle in his body go still. Grant lowered his voice. "She always believed family had a duty to keep one another from becoming hard. I worry about you, Eli. Grief can make a man suspicious. It can turn good intentions into enemies." There it was, not a threat, something worse, permission to doubt himself. For a moment, Eli was no longer in the church basement. He was in the hospital hallway after Claire's death, holding flowers someone had handed him because his hands had been empty. Grant had stood there then, speaking gently, perfectly, while Eli stared at the closed door of a room he had reached too late. Maybe Grant knew exactly where to press. Maybe men like Grant did not need maps. They simply felt for bruises. Eli almost said nothing. The younger North Star employee stepped off the last stair, carrying a box of fuel vouchers. Mercy rose. She did not bark. She did not rush. The entire basement seemed to notice her standing because something in her presence changed the air. Her body was heavy, tired, and trembling, but she moved in front of Mavis Rowe's chair and placed herself between the old woman and the North Star man. The young employee stopped. His face lost color. Hannah's eyes narrowed. She looked at the man, then at the service forms on the table behind her. "I know him," she said quietly. "His name is on Lorraine's inspection notice." Grant turned. Dogs can be reactive after trauma. Mercy's growl was low and controlled, not rage, recognition. Mavis's hand found the back of Mercy's neck. Clifford sat forward in his chair. Lorraine's lips pressed together. Around the room, people who had been embarrassed to need blankets suddenly watched the dog stand between them and the company that had called their homes unsafe. Eli took Grant's hand off his shoulder, gently, completely. "Don't use Claire's name for this," he said. Grant's eyes cooled. "Only a fraction. Enough. I'm using her name because I remember her kindly." "No," Eli said. "You're using her because you think grief makes good rope." The room went very quiet. Amos stepped in before the quiet could become violence. "Mr. Vey," he said, his voice still pastoral but no longer soft, "if your men want to leave the boxes at the door, we'll inventory them. If you came for gratitude, the weather is too dangerous for theater." Grant looked around the basement, at the blankets, at the papers half covered on the table, at Mercy standing in front of Mavis, at June holding a ladle like a weapon blessed by soup. His smile returned thinner. "Careful, Pastor. North Star has carried this town through many winters. A church should think hard before offending the hands that help keep it warm." Several people heard it. That mattered. Not everyone understood paperwork. Not everyone understood subsidy ledgers or property liens. But everyone in that basement understood a gift that sounded like a collar. Amos's keys chimed once as he shifted his weight. "The church was warm before North Star had a logo," he said, "and if necessary, we'll learn how to be warm after it." Grant's jaw tightened. June lifted the ladle. "I can send soup with you, Mr. Vey. It's free. That means you don't get to own the bowl." A few people laughed. Small laughter, nervous, but real. Grant turned toward Eli once more. "This is a difficult night. People are frightened. I won't take offense." "You should," Eli said. "It might teach you where the line is." The red-faced employee set down his box too hard. The younger one would not look at Mercy. Grant studied Eli for a long moment, then nodded as if forgiving a child. "We'll talk when everyone is calmer." "No," Eli said. "We'll talk when everyone is warmer." Grant left the basement without another word. The cold he brought with him lingered for several minutes after the door shut. Then June slapped a lid onto the soup pot. Well, that man could make a donation feel like a ransom note. This time more people laughed. The room breathed again, but it was not the same room. Something had shifted. The people in blankets were no longer only being sheltered. They were witnesses now, whether they wanted to be or not. They had heard Grant. They had seen Mercy's fear. They had felt in their own bones the shape of the power that had been smiling at them from brochures and winter charity drives. Eli stood near the center of the basement. He did not plan to speak. Public words had never been his gift. He trusted actions, tools, engines, weather, rope. Speech could become performance too easily. But Lorraine was watching him. Mavis, too. Clifford, with his square white beard and stubborn eyes. Hannah stood by the medical table, Amos near the stairs. Mercy lowered herself slowly back onto her blanket, exhausted from standing, but her eyes stayed on him. Eli cleared his throat. "Tomorrow," he said. The room quieted. He had intended one sentence. It became several. "Tomorrow, if you have North Star invoices, inspection notices, transfer agreements, repair estimates, anything you signed and didn't understand, bring it here. Not so anybody can shame you, not so anyone can call you helpless. Bring it, because one paper can be dismissed. A stack becomes harder to bury." No one moved. He looked at Mavis. "If you need a ride, I'll come." Then Clifford. "If you don't want to bring it yourself, Amos will." Clifford grunted. "I can carry my own paper." "I know." June nodded approvingly. That almost sounded like leadership. Don't let it go to your head. Eli looked down, but not before Hannah saw the faint change in his face. Outside, the storm pressed against the church windows. Inside, people began talking in lower voices, not confession now, but comparison. Dates, names, amounts, signatures. The basement warmed not only with heaters and soup, but with the dangerous energy of people realizing their private humiliations had been designed. Near midnight, Nora Whitlake appeared at the top of the basement stairs. She did not come down at first. Eli saw her from across the room. Plum coat. Brown bob tucked behind one ear. Canvas tote clutched against her chest, snow melting from her shoulders. Her face seemed smaller than it had the day before, as if shame had hollowed it. At the bottom of the stairs, June was wrapping a quilt around an elderly woman Eli had not met. The woman's hair was thin and white, her hands knobbed with arthritis. She looked up toward Nora. "Nora?" she called softly. Nora's face broke, not loudly, not dramatically. It simply lost the structure that had been holding it together. "My mother," Hannah whispered. Eli understood. Nora stood frozen while June tucked the quilt around her mother's knees with the brisk tenderness of a battlefield nurse disguised as a diner owner. For the first time, Nora saw the cost of her silence not in numbers, not in codes, not in altered ledgers, but in the shape of her own mother's shoulders under a borrowed blanket. Mercy lifted her head from the blanket and looked toward the stairs. Nora covered her mouth. She did not speak that night. She did not hand over the tote, not yet, but she came down the stairs. That was enough for the moment. Outside, Ash River Crossing remained dark beneath the storm. Houses sat without power, their windows black, their roofs bowed with snow. But under the church, in a basement that smelled of soup, wet wool, old stone, and dog fur, the town's buried warmth gathered itself into one room. Eli stood beside the table where the first invoices had begun to stack. For years he had believed survival meant needing no one. By the time the bell above them gave one low groan in the wind, he was beginning to understand that survival might mean building a room where no one had to be cold alone. By morning, the church basement smelled like weak coffee, damp wool, soup gone thick in the pot, and the stubborn breath of people who had made it through the night. The power had not returned. Ash River Crossing lay under a white silence, the kind that came after a storm had spent its rage and left the world buried beneath its decisions. Outside, snowbanks pressed against the church steps. The streetlights were dead. The town square looked abandoned, except for the thin smoke rising from the church chimney and the tire tracks Eli Mercer had carved into the road before dawn. Inside, people slept where they could. Mavis Rowe sat upright in a folding chair, wrapped in a quilt, her chin tucked to her chest. Clifford Ames snored in sharp, offended bursts near the heater, as if even sleep had insulted him. Lorraine Sutter held a paper cup of coffee with both hands and stared toward the stairwell, not frightened exactly, but changed by the knowledge that she had not been the only one ashamed. June Haskell moved among them with a ladle and a towel over one shoulder, queen of a kingdom made of soup, blankets, and scolding. Amos Bell stood near the folding table, sorting the papers people had begun to bring him. Invoices, inspection forms, lien notices, relocation brochures, and handwritten notes from those too embarrassed to speak in front of others. Hannah Pike knelt beside Mercy, checking the German shepherd's pulse with 2 fingers against the inside of her hind leg. Mercy hadn't slept well. Her body was exhausted, but her mind would not settle. All night she had lifted her head whenever the wind struck the basement windows. When someone coughed too hard, she opened her eyes. When a man in a North Star cap had passed near the stairs before leaving with Grant Vay, Mercy's lip had trembled with a sound so low Eli felt it more than heard it. Now she stood. Slowly. Hannah looked up. No. Mercy ignored her. The dog crossed the basement with stiff, careful steps, belly heavy, bandaged paw touching the floor like an argument she intended to win. She went to the stairwell, stopped, and looked back at Eli. He was carrying a crate of firewood toward the heater. "Don't start." Mercy gave a soft whine. Not pain, not fear, something more focused. Hannah stood. She needs to lie down. Mercy turned toward the side door above the stairs. Amos watched her, his silver brows drawing together. "That dog has the look of someone who remembered an appointment." "She's not going anywhere," Hannah said. Mercy placed one paw on the first step. Eli set the crate down. He had learned the difference between Mercy wanting comfort and Mercy needing movement. This was neither restlessness nor canine stubbornness. The air around her seemed drawn tight. She was not asking to chase a scent. She was trying to return to someone. Earl. The name moved through him without being spoken. Eli went up the stairs and opened the side door. Cold air slid in. Mercy lifted her nose. The morning light hit her face, catching the pale golden mark beneath her eye. She breathed once, twice, then turned not toward Earl's house, not toward the mine road, but toward the lower edge of town, where the frozen lake lay beyond a stand of birch and black spruce. Hannah came up behind Eli. "Absolutely not." Mercy looked at her. Hannah pointed at the dog. "Do not look at me like that. You are pregnant, injured, dehydrated, and officially my worst patient." Mercy's torn ear tilted. Amos arrived with his coat half-buttoned. "I hate to interrupt medical authority, but she may be the only one in town who knows where Earl went." "She also may go into early labor on a frozen lake," Hannah said. "Then we go slowly," Eli said. Hannah turned to him. "That is not a plan. That is a sentence men say before I have to save them." Eli met her eyes. "If Earl is out there, he made it through one night. Maybe two, maybe less. We wait, we may lose him." Her jaw tightened. That was the cruel geometry of the morning. One life inside many lives, leading them toward one life that might already be fading. Hannah looked down at Mercy. The dog's sides moved with heavy breaths, but her eyes did not leave the white world beyond the door. "Blankets," Hannah said at last. "My bag, warm fluids, rope, and if she falters, we turn back." Mercy stepped through the doorway as if the matter had always been settled. They took Eli's truck as far as the plowed edge behind the old bait shop, then went on foot. Amos stayed with them, despite Eli telling him twice to remain at the church. "My knees are old," Amos said, tightening his burgundy scarf. "Not ornamental." The lake opened before them, pale and wide under the winter morning. Ice fishing shacks dotted the white expanse in crooked rows, small dark boxes anchored against the wind. Some were painted red or blue, others plain plywood gray, all half buried to their doors. Snow blew across the surface in thin silver streams. The world out there seemed made only of light, cold, and distance. Mercy moved slowly. That made it worse. A dog running could be dismissed as excitement. A dog like Mercy, walking with the grave patience of a mother carrying unborn children across a frozen plain, seemed less like an animal following scent and more like the last thread of loyalty pulling itself through the storm. Eli walked beside her, one hand loosely holding the leash, though he knew she was leading him more than he was guiding her. Hannah followed close enough to watch every stumble. Amos carried a thermos and muttered short prayers that sounded suspiciously like complaints. Halfway across, Mercy stopped. She lowered her head to a drift where tire tracks had been softened by fresh snow. Eli crouched. Beneath the powder, the marks were wide, with a deep tread. Snowmobile, maybe utility sled? Beside it, a darker smear marked the ice where fuel or oil had dripped. Hannah knelt and touched the snow near the stain. Recent. Amos looked toward the shacks. "Which one?" Mercy answered by moving again. The shack stood apart from the others near the far side of the lake, close to a cluster of reeds and wind-bent spruce. It had once been green, though weather had peeled most of the color away. A small stovepipe leaned from the roof at an angle that made it look wounded. No smoke rose from it. Mercy reached the door and pressed her nose against the gap. Then she made a sound Eli had never heard from her. It was not a bark, not a whine. It was thin, broken, and ancient with worry. Hannah's face changed. "Earl!" Eli called. The lake swallowed the name. For a moment, nothing happened. Then from inside the shack came a faint scrape. Once, then again. Amos closed his eyes briefly. Thank God. Eli tried the door. A padlock held it shut from outside. His hand went still. The lock was new, bright steel against old wood. Hannah saw it too. That wasn't weather. No. Eli pulled bolt cutters from his pack. The lock snapped with a hard, clean crack that seemed too loud on the frozen lake. He opened the door carefully. The smell inside was sour with cold, propane, old fish, and unwashed fear. Earl Donnelly lay on the floor beneath a thin blanket, curled near a small propane heater whose flame had burned down to a weak blue tremble. He was smaller than Eli remembered, not because age had changed him, but because suffering had folded him inward. His white-gray beard was matted, his face flushed with fever, and dried blood darkened one side of his temple. One hand was wrapped in a rag. The other clutched a battered wrench, as if stubbornness alone had kept him armed. His eyes opened halfway. "About time," he rasped. Mercy pushed past Eli. Hannah began to object, then stopped. The German shepherd lowered herself beside Earl with a care that looked almost painful, pressing her muzzle against his chest. Earl's face crumpled. The old man who had cursed bad furnaces, weather reports, politicians, extension cords, and most brands of coffee began to cry without dignity and without apology. "My girl," he whispered, fingers shaking into the fur behind her torn ear. "My good girl, you kept them babies?" Mercy whined into his coat. Earl gave a wet laugh that turned into a cough. "Don't you scold me. I didn't plan this." Eli looked away for 1 second, not because the reunion embarrassed him, because it did not. That was worse. He had thought of Mercy as a rescued dog, then as a witness, then as a guide. In that shack, watching her press her heavy body against the old man who had belonged to her before terror and snow and North Star, Eli understood how thin those words were. Mercy was family, not symbol, not clue, family. The kind that crossed ice on torn paws because love had not finished its work. Hannah moved in. "Earl, I'm Hannah Pike. I'm going to check you." "Vet?" Earl muttered. "Yes?" "I ain't a Labrador." "No, Labradors are better behaved." A faint spark of the old man returned. "That's slander." "Hold still and sue me later." Amos laughed once under his breath, relief cracking through his worry. Earl was dehydrated, feverish, bruised, and weak. The cut on his head had clotted badly. His fingers were swollen from cold and effort. A few cans lay open in the corner. The propane tank connected to the heater was nearly empty. Whoever left him had left just enough supplies to call it confinement instead of murder until the storm turned calculation into cruelty. Eli searched the shack while Hannah worked. A narrow cot, a dead flashlight, rope, a crate stamped with the name of a local equipment company that did contract work for North Star, a half-burned envelope in the metal stove. He did not disturb much. He took photos, noted positions, pocketed nothing except a wet paper scrap lying near the cot after Hannah nodded that it would be lost to meltwater otherwise. On it, in Earl's handwriting, were 3 words. "Mercy has copies." Eli looked at the dog. Mercy remained pressed to Earl, her eyes half closed, as if she had heard enough human panic and would now focus on keeping him alive by weight and will. They wrapped Earl in blankets and helped him up slowly. He cursed the entire process, which Hannah declared an encouraging sign. Amos fed him warm water in small sips from the thermos. On the way back across the lake, Earl leaned heavily on Eli's shoulder while Hannah watched Mercy with increasing concern. The dog walked slower now. Too slow. Her head dipped several times. Her sides tightened once, then again. "Hannah," Eli said, "I see it." Mercy stopped near the shore and refused to take another step. Not out of stubbornness. Her legs trembled beneath her. Her breathing turned shallow, her belly tightened visibly, and she looked back at Hannah with the first true uncertainty Eli had ever seen in her eyes. Hannah knelt at once, one hand on Mercy's side. "Easy, easy, girl." Earl, barely standing, tried to turn. "What's wrong?" "Stress," Hannah said, too calm. "Cold. Too much movement. She may be starting early." Earl's face lost what little color he had regained. No, she can't. She hasn't yet, Hannah said, but we need her warm now. Eli lifted Mercy. The dog was heavier than before, or maybe he was more aware now of everything he carried. Her head rested against his chest. For a strange, sharp moment, he thought of Claire leaning into him in the kitchen years ago after a treatment, pretending she was only tired, not afraid. He had held her then and believed holding was less useful than curing. He had been wrong. Sometimes holding was the only thing left that still meant anything. By the time they reached the church, June met them at the side door and shouted for space before anyone had explained. One look at Mercy, one look at Earl, and she began giving orders with the authority of a battlefield commander disguised in an apron. You, move that cot. You, hot water. Amos, stop looking holy and find more towels. Eli, don't stand there turning into a statue. I'm carrying the dog. Then be a useful statue and carry her over here. The basement shifted around them. People woke, rose, made room. Mavis covered her mouth when she saw Earl. Clifford tried to stand too fast and nearly fell. Lorraine brought blankets without being asked. They settled Earl on a cot near the far wall. He grabbed Amos's sleeve. North Star, he rasped. Grant, the valves, Vay Properties. I wrote it down. We know some, Amos said. Not all. Rest. Earl shook his head, stubborn, even half-frozen. Mercy. Bag. Copies. I hid copies. His eyes searched for Eli. They found me before I could bring the rest. Where? Eli asked. Earl's mouth opened. Then Mercy gave a low, strained sound from the blankets. The question died. Hannah was already on her knees beside the dog, checking her belly. Mercy panted hard, eyes wide, claws pressing into the blanket. Eli stepped forward without thinking. What do you need? Hannah looked up at him. Light, warm water, towels, quiet, and for you not to go charging after whatever Earl was about to tell us. That hit him like a slap, because she had aimed exactly where he was moving. Earl was alive. He had evidence. He knew more. Somewhere out there, Grant Vay might already be clearing files, moving men, polishing lies. The old part of Eli, the part trained to seize advantage before it vanished, rose hard in him. Go now. Push. Find. Stop him before he buries the trail. Mercy panted again. Her body trembled on the blanket. Earl, feverish and weak, tried to lift his head from the cot, eyes fixed on his dog. Around them, the basement held old people who had nowhere warmer to go, a pastor with too many keys and not enough hands, a vet whose face had become all focus, and June Haskell standing ready with towels as if soup and birth were both forms of war. Eli looked toward the stairs, then back at Mercy. For years he had believed his failure with Claire had been absence, not being there, not knowing, not arriving in time. Now the chance to be absent wore a different mask. It called itself action. It called itself justice. It promised him the clean comfort of doing something hard and visible. Mercy turned her head toward him, not pleading, not commanding, simply seeing whether he would stay. Eli took off his jacket, rolled up the sleeves of his olive combat shirt, and knelt beside Hannah. Tell me what to do. Hannah held his gaze for one brief second. Then she handed him a lantern. Hold this steady. So he did. For the next hour, Eli Mercer did not chase anyone. He held the light. He warmed towels by the heater and passed them when Hannah asked. He carried bowls of water from June. He kept Mercy's head steady when another contraction threatened but did not fully take hold. He spoke to her in a low voice, words that were not brave enough to be prayers and not ordinary enough to be instructions. Stay with us. Easy. You did your part. Let us do ours. Mercy did not give birth that morning. Hannah managed to slow the danger, to coax her body back from the edge with warmth, quiet, fluids, and the grace of competent hands. The pups remained where they were, still moving beneath Mercy's side like small secrets of life, refusing winter's timetable. When Mercy finally slept, the whole basement seemed to exhale. Earl slept too, feverish but alive, one hand curled around the gray wool cloth from Mercy's bag. Amos sat beside him, reading the copied notes through tired eyes. June moved quietly now, which was more alarming than her shouting. Hannah washed her hands in a metal basin and leaned against the wall for 3 seconds before straightening again. Eli remained seated beside Mercy. The lantern sat on the floor between his boots, its light low and gold. He looked at his hands. They were scratched, cold-reddened, steady. No weapon, no wrench, no steering wheel, no rope, just hands that had held light while someone else saved lives. It should have felt like doing less. It did not. Across the basement, Earl opened one eye. "Mercer." Eli looked over. "You stayed," the old man rasped. Eli glanced down at Mercy, sleeping under the blanket, her torn ear folded softly, her oil-marked eye finally closed. "Yeah," he said. Earl gave the smallest nod, as if this settled more than Eli understood. Good. Dog knows things. Then he fell asleep again. Outside, the lake lay white and silent beneath the morning. The fishing shack stood locked open now, its secret emptied but not finished. Somewhere, Grant Vay still had papers to hide and lies to polish. But in the church basement, a pregnant German shepherd breathed steadily beside the man who had chosen, for once, not to run toward the fight. He stayed. And in that staying, something in him that had been frozen longer than any Minnesota lake began, painfully, to thaw. The town hall still had no reliable power, so Ash River Crossing held its emergency hearing in the church. It was not an official courtroom. There was no judge in a black robe, no polished bench, no flag standing in theatrical stillness beneath clean electric light. The sanctuary was lit by lanterns, candles, and 2 generator-fed lamps that hummed near the front pews. Wind pressed against the stained-glass windows, making the old panes tremble faintly in their lead seams. Snow tapped the roof in restless handfuls. Below them, in the basement, the heaters still burned. That mattered. Every person sitting upstairs could smell soup drifting up through the floor vents. They could hear the occasional cough, the scrape of a chair, June Haskell's voice telling someone that coffee is not medicine, but it improves cooperation. The people whose homes had gone cold were not an idea. They were beneath the sanctuary, wrapped in church blankets, alive because the church had become what the town had failed to be. Eli Mercer stood near the back wall, hands at his sides, watching the pews fill. Retired miners came in with their caps held against their chests. Nurses arrived in winter boots after long shifts. Shop owners, snowplow drivers, widows, mechanics, council members, and people who had once smiled beside Grant Vay at fundraisers took their seats with the uneasy posture of those who suspected the room might ask something of them. No one spoke loudly. The church seemed to make even guilt whisper. At the front stood Beatrice Larkin. She was 63, tall and spare, in a steel-gray coat, her silver bob cut sharp along her jaw. A former school principal, she had the kind of calm that could make grown men sit straighter without understanding why. She placed a red teacher's pencil beside a stack of papers and adjusted her thin glasses. Eli had never liked council proceedings. Too much language, too much polite delay. But Beatrice's face had changed since the night before. The woman who had once trusted forms because forms were supposed to protect people now looked like someone who had discovered paper could be trained to lie. Amos Bell stepped to the pulpit, not to preach, but because the church had no better podium. His white hair was slightly wild, his collar crooked beneath a dark cardigan, and the keys at his belt gave one soft chime as he moved. "This is not a trial," Amos said. "It is not a sermon either, though I admit those are hard habits for me to break." A thin ripple of laughter moved through the pews and died quickly. "We are here because people in this town lost heat, lost trust, and nearly lost more than that. Councilwoman Larkin will keep order. Sheriff's deputies from the county are on their way as roads allow. Until then, we will speak carefully, hear plainly, and remember that cold can kill even when no one intends to call it murder." Beatrice nodded once. "Thank you, Pastor." Her voice carried without strain. "We will begin with the documents gathered last night and this morning. We will keep this orderly. Interruptions will stop. Personal attacks will stop. Anyone attempting to intimidate a witness will leave this church. If you doubt me, I spent 31 years teaching 7th graders during indoor recess." That earned a better laugh, brief but grateful. Then Earl Donnelly rose from the first pew. Or tried to? Eli moved before he thought. So did Amos. Earl scowled at both of them, which was the surest sign he remained alive enough to be himself. "I can stand," Earl muttered. "For about 4 seconds," Hannah Pike said from the aisle. Earl gave her a look. "Veterinarian. Patient. I'm not your patient. You fainted into my medical bag this morning. That bag was in the way." "So sit down, Earl," Beatrice said. He sat. The room relaxed by a single breath. Earl looked smaller than his reputation. His beard was still uncombed, a bandage crossed one side of his forehead, and his hands trembled when he unfolded the notebook Amos placed before him. But when he began to speak, the old furnace man returned in pieces. Rough voice, stubborn jaw, anger sharpened by knowledge rather than pride. He explained the valves, not like a lawyer, like a man who had spent his life making sure fire traveled safely through pipes. "Same batch number," he said, tapping the notebook with one swollen finger. "Same cheap part put in different houses. They'd inspect, replace something that didn't need replacing, charge the program, then come back when it failed. After that, the house got called unsafe. Unsafe house means scared owner. Scared owner signs paper." He coughed hard enough that Hannah stepped forward. Earl waved her off, then accepted the water she handed him, which was as close to surrender as he got. "They weren't fixing heat," he said. "They were making cold profitable." No one laughed. Hannah spoke next. She did not dramatize. That made it worse. She listed what she had seen: mild hypothermia, respiratory stress, frost-nipped fingers, medication skipped because bills were too high, elderly people sleeping in coats while companies argued over forms. She did not use the language of outrage. She used the language of bodies. "Cold has measurements," she said, holding up her notes: pulse, oxygen, skin temperature, lung sounds. It does not care whether an invoice looks legal. A woman in the third pew began to cry quietly. Amos read names from the shelter list: Mavis Rowe, Clifford Ames, Lorraine Sutter, Glenn Pritchard, Ada Whitlake, others who had slept beneath the church because home was no longer warm enough to be called safe. He read each name as if it belonged in stained glass. June stood near the side aisle with a coffee urn on a small cart, arms folded over her cream apron. Her eyes were red, but her mouth remained ready for war. When Mavis admitted she had slept in 2 coats for 12 nights, June whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear, "If shame could heat a house, North Star would be out of business." Then the doors opened. Grant Vay entered with 2 men in dark coats and a woman carrying a leather portfolio. Grant looked almost untouched by the storm. His black overcoat was brushed clean, his navy scarf neat, his silver blonde hair combed back with expensive restraint. His face wore concern as gracefully as another man might wear a medal. Beside him, his attorney introduced himself as Martin Kells, a narrow man with polished shoes, unsuited for slush, and a voice designed to make cruelty sound procedural. Grant nodded to Beatrice. "Councilwoman, I appreciate your willingness to hear all sides." Beatrice marked something on her pad with the red pencil. All sides may speak, none may perform. Grant's smile held. He spoke of crisis, fuel shortages, aging homes, liability, winter safety standards, misunderstood documents, a cooperative under pressure, a town dependent on services no one appreciated until the pipes froze. He sounded reasonable. That was his gift. He made harm seem like logistics and fear seem like prudence. No one at North Star benefits from anyone being cold, he said. A cough came from the first pew. Earl smiled without humor. That's so? Grant did not look at him. Mr. Donnelly is ill, and I sympathize, but illness, confusion, and fear can lead to mistaken conclusions. The words moved through the sanctuary like cold air under a door. Then Darren Holt stood near the back. No one had noticed him come in. He wore a brown work jacket without the North Star patch, jeans stiff with dried slush, and a black knit cap twisted in both hands. His broad face looked sleepless. Red stubble shadowed his jaw. He seemed like a man who had rehearsed bravery in the truck and lost half of it walking to the church. "I moved the dog," Darren said. Grant turned slowly. Darren swallowed. "I was hired contract. Cash plus 2 weeks of work. Told to take Earl Shepherd out past the county line. Said she was aggressive. Said she kept going places she shouldn't." The sanctuary went utterly quiet. Eli felt Hannah stiffen beside the aisle. Darren looked toward the basement door as if mercy might hear him through the floor. "I didn't know she was pregnant. I didn't know Earl was locked up somewhere. I swear that." His voice broke slightly. "Trailer slid on the mine road. I panicked, cut the hitch loose and left. I told myself she was a dog, and dogs survive things." June's face hardened, but she did not speak. "That was a lie," Darren said. "I knew it when I said it to myself." Grant's attorney rose. "This man is admitting criminal negligence and attempting to shift blame." Beatrice lifted one hand. The lawyer stopped. "Mr. Holt," she said, "who hired you?" Darren looked at Grant, then at the floor. North Star operations manager gave the call. But Mr. Vey knew. He was standing in the office when they said Earl's dog had to disappear. Grant's smile vanished for half a second. Then Nora Whitlake stood. She had been sitting near the side aisle behind her mother Ada, who still wore a church quilt over her shoulders. Nora's plum coat was unbuttoned, her brown bob tucked behind one ear, and the canvas tote from the night before rested at her feet. She gripped the back of the pew so hard, her knuckles whitened. "I changed the codes," she said. Her voice was small. Beatrice leaned forward. "Speak clearly, Ms. Whitlake." Nora closed her eyes once, then opened them. "I changed subsidy codes, moved winter assistance payments into maintenance accounts, backdated inspections, matched failed repairs to safety reviews. I also processed payments from Vey Properties to a consulting company that invoices North Star." Her breath caught. "The consulting company belongs to Mr. Vey's brother-in-law." Grant said, "Nora." Not loudly. That was the frightening part. One word, soft as a hand over a candle. Nora flinched. Her mother reached back from the pew and touched her sleeve. That touch changed everything. Nora looked down at Ada's bent fingers, at the quilt June had wrapped around her, at the woman who had raised her to balance checkbooks and apologize for taking the last biscuit. Then Nora lifted her chin. "I told myself it was paperwork," she said. "I told myself those houses were old. Those people were old. I told myself they'd have to move eventually, so maybe this was just making it happen sooner." The silence after that was not empty. It was full of judgment too heavy for shouting. Nora began to cry, but she did not sit down. "I was wrong," she said. "And people got cold because I was afraid to be unemployed." The church did not forgive her in that moment. That would have been too easy. But it hurt her. Grant rose. The temperature in the sanctuary seemed to drop. "This has become emotional theater," he said. "A frightened contractor, a compromised employee, a sick repairman, and a room full of people understandably distressed by a storm." His gaze found Eli. And Mr. Mercer, of course. Eli felt the turn before Grant made it. "Eli has suffered more than most of us can imagine," Grant continued, voice softening in that polished way Eli hated. "Claire was my family. I loved her too. She would be heartbroken to see her husband used as a weapon against the people she cared for." Hannah whispered, "Eli." He did not move. Grant stepped into the aisle. Grief can make a man look for enemies. It can make coincidence feel like conspiracy. It can make a good man mistake pain for purpose. For one terrible moment, Eli saw Claire. Not as she had been in sickness, but years before, standing barefoot in their kitchen, laughing as she tossed him a scratched silver Zippo from a flea market table. "Every brooding soldier needs one dramatic object," she had said. He could hear her voice so clearly that the church blurred. Grant had chosen the blade well. Eli looked down at his hands. The old reflex came. Lock the door, close the face, leave the room before pity arrived. Then, from below, a thin sound rose through the floor vent. A newborn cry. No, not human. A puppy. Small, wet, furious at the world. Hannah's head snapped toward the basement stairs. June was already moving. Eli turned, and for a heartbeat, the whole church held still between two kinds of truth, the paper truth upstairs and the breathing truth below. A second tiny cry followed. Mercy had gone into labor. The hearing did not end. It changed shape. Hannah ran downstairs. June followed, shouting for hot water and towels as if she had been waiting all her life to command this exact war. Several women rose to help. Beatrice stood, struck the table once with her red pencil, and said, "This hearing continues. Life is not an adjournment." That line should have sounded absurd. It sounded like law. Eli remained where he was. Grant watched him carefully, expecting the old wound to pull him apart, expecting Claire's name to turn him into either rage or silence. Instead, Eli spoke. "My wife's name was Claire," he said. The sanctuary stilled again. "She died while I was away. I blamed God. I blamed the Navy. I blamed myself. Some days I still do, because grief doesn't obey orders and it doesn't respect paperwork." Grant's expression tightened. Eli's voice stayed low. "I am not here because I need someone to pay for Claire. No one in this room can give her back to me. I am here because Mavis Rowe slept in 2 coats. Because Clifford Ames was made to feel too old to understand his own house. Because Lorraine Sutter nearly signed away the room where her husband died. Because Earl Donnelly was locked in a shack. Because Mercy was dragged away while carrying pups." He looked at Grant now. "And because living people were treated like property waiting to be transferred." No one moved. Then Beatrice picked up the red pencil and drew one hard line across the paper before her. "Emergency council action," she said. "All pending property transfers involving North Star Heating and Fuel, Vay Properties, or related entities are frozen pending county review. All fuel assistance accounts are to be audited. Documentation gathered here will be forwarded to the county prosecutor. North Star's emergency supply function will be temporarily supervised through county coordination and neighboring providers." Grant's attorney began to object. Beatrice looked at him over her glasses. He sat. Grant did not shout. Men like him did not surrender dignity cheaply. He buttoned his coat, gathered his papers, and walked down the aisle with his lawyer and portfolio woman behind him. But when he reached the open basement door, he stopped. Below, Mercy lay on clean blankets, sides heaving, Hannah at her back, June kneeling with towels, Amos holding a lantern. Around them stood the very people Grant had counted on being too embarrassed, too cold, too scattered to become a witness. Mavis looked at him, then Clifford, then Lorraine, then Nora, with tears still on her face, but her mother's hand in hers. Grant looked away first. That was when Eli knew what had cracked. Not the company. Not yet. The silence. The rest came in fragments. More documents gathered. More names written. Beatrice making calls from Amos's office. A county deputy arriving late, snow-covered and grim. Earl sleeping in a side room under Hannah's orders. Grant gone, but no longer clean in anyone's imagination. Below, Mercy labored through the afternoon. It was not beautiful in the easy way people made birth sound after it was over. It was messy, frightening, exhausting work. Mercy trembled. Hannah's voice stayed steady, even when her face grew tight. June kept water warm. Amos prayed under his breath and pretended he was only counting towels. Eli knelt where Hannah told him to kneel and did exactly what she told him to do. One pup came strong, another smaller, a third with a thin cry that made Mavis cover her mouth and laugh through tears. Then came the weakest one. For a moment, the little body did not move. Hannah worked fast, rubbing, clearing, warming. Eli, hands. He cupped the pup in a towel so small it seemed impossible that life could fit inside it. The body was slick and fragile, no heavier than a promise. Hannah guided his fingers. Gentle. Keep warmth around him. Eli held the pup close, bent over it, and felt terror unlike combat, unlike storms, unlike any clean danger he had known. This life was too small to command, too small to rescue by force. All he could do was shelter it. "Come on," he whispered. Mercy lifted her head, exhausted eyes fixed on him. "Come on," Eli said again, voice rougher. "You're late to a hard world, little man, but there's soup downstairs and a dog who outranks everyone. Breathe." The pup twitched. Once, then opened its tiny mouth and cried. The sound was thin, offended, glorious. A laugh broke from June. Amos wiped his face with his sleeve and claimed there was steam in his eyes. Hannah bowed her head for 1 second, then took the pup and placed him against Mercy's belly. Eli sat back on his heels. His hands shook. Not from cold. He had spent years believing his hands belonged to endings, closed doors, folded flags, tools, weapons, engines, graves. Now they smelled of wet fur, towels, and new life. Mercy lowered her head to her pups. Outside, Ash River Crossing remained locked in winter. The legal fight had only begun. Grant Vey still had money, lawyers, and lies polished smooth enough to slide under doors. But in the basement of a cold church, a German shepherd named Mercy nursed her newborns while an old town listened to itself breathe differently. And Eli Mercer, who had once arrived too late for the woman he loved, had been present for the smallest cry of a life beginning. For that hour, it was enough. Justice did not arrive in Ash River Crossing like thunder. It came like thaw, slow, uneven, dripping from the eaves in clear drops before anyone dared call it spring. 3 days after the hearing, the county prosecutor issued warrants for Grant Vey and 2 senior officers tied to North Star Heating and Fuel. The news moved through town carefully at first, as if people were afraid saying it too loudly might break it. Grant was not dragged through the snow in front of a cheering crowd. He was taken from his office by county deputies while his lawyer stood beside him with a briefcase and a face that had learned how to lose without admitting it. North Star was placed under temporary supervision so no one would lose fuel while the accounts were audited. Vey Properties had its transfers frozen. The subsidy ledgers Nora Whitlake had helped alter were turned over to investigators. Darren Holt gave a statement that seemed to cost him more than the winter work he had lost. Earl Donnelly gave 4 statements, each more irritable than the last, until Hannah Pike threatened to sedate him for the good of public safety. No one celebrated very loudly. That surprised Eli Mercer at first. He had expected anger to erupt once the truth had a name and a warrant. Instead, the town moved through the days with a quieter weight. People did not only have to accept that Grant had lied, they had to accept that they had liked him for it. They had smiled at his donations, posed beside his fuel drives, repeated his words about safety and responsibility. They had let cold enter their neighbors' houses because it arrived carrying forms and wearing clean gloves. That kind of guilt did not leave the room just because one man was arrested. It sat down. It waited to be dealt with. The church basement stayed open. At first, Amos Bell said it would be temporary, a week, perhaps two, until power stabilized, furnaces were checked, and county fuel assistance was reorganized. But by the fifth day, June Haskell had rearranged the pantry shelves. Hannah had set up a folding veterinary table in the corner, Earl had hung a pegboard for tools, and Eli had repaired the back steps, the side door latch, 2 heater vents, and the coffee urn that June had called a theological disappointment. Temporary in Ash River Crossing began to look suspiciously like permanent. The name came from Mavis Rowe. She was sitting beside Mercy one afternoon, one hand resting lightly on the German shepherd's head, while the newborn pup slept in a wooden crate lined with towels. The basement was warmer now, not just from heaters, but from use. People came in and out carrying soup, toolboxes, forms, extension cords, and stories they had been holding too long. "This place needs a name," Mavis said. Amos, who was balancing a clipboard, a mug, and 2 pencils behind one ear, answered, "The basement has served faithfully under the name basement for 80 years. June snorted from the stove. "And look how ambitious it became." Mavis looked at Mercy, whose torn ear twitched as one pup crawled clumsily over its litter mate. "Call it Mercy House." No one joked for a moment. Even June let the spoon rest. Amos looked at Eli. Eli looked down at Mercy. The dog lifted her eyes to him, calm, tired, and utterly unimpressed by human sentiment. "Mercy House," Eli said. So it was. Earl made the sign. He refused help for most of it, which meant he accepted help only when no one used the word. He sat at a workbench near the church boiler with a plank of pine across his knees, his white-gray beard still uneven from the days he had spent in the fishing shack. His hands had not fully recovered from the cold. The fingers stiffened when he tried to grip too long. He cursed them as traitors, then kept working. The words were burned into the wood with a heated tool, crooked in 2 places because Earl's hands shook. Mercy House. No one freezes alone. When June saw it, she put both hands on her hips. "Well, that is almost pretty enough to make up for your personality." Earl squinted at her. "Your soup is too salty." "You had 3 bowls." "Evidence." She laughed so hard, Mercy lifted her head from the crate to make sure no one needed supervision. The sign went above the basement stairs. After that, people began arriving not only because they were cold, but because the room had become somewhere a person could come before the emergency. There were furnace checkup lists pinned to the wall, a coffee table for subsidy forms, a calendar where volunteers signed up for wood deliveries, heater inspections, prescription runs, and rides to the county office. Hannah kept a small veterinary corner with clean towels, basic supplies, and a handwritten sign. Old pets welcome, stubborn owners tolerated. More than once, she checked an elderly cat, trimmed the nails of a trembling terrier, or listened to an old man explain that his mutt was fine, while the mutt clearly disagreed. Earl began training volunteers, not children, not a symbolic crowd. Adults with jobs, aches, bad backs, doubts, and enough guilt to make them useful. A nurse who worked nights learned how to identify a bad furnace smell. A snowplow driver learned to check vent clearance after storms. A grocery clerk with strong hands learned how to replace a filter without turning the wrong valve. Clifford Ames attended every session, claimed it was only to make sure Earl did not teach nonsense, then corrected people with such ferocity that Earl declared him assistant nuisance. Eli attended too. At first he told himself it was because someone needed to lift heavy things. Then he told himself it was because Earl still tired easily. By the third week, he stopped inventing reasons. Mercy came with him almost every day. She lived at Eli's cabin now. No one had held a ceremony for it. There had been no dramatic transfer, no tearful farewell. Earl had simply looked at Mercy one evening as Eli prepared to leave and said, "She's decided." Eli had looked at the dog. Mercy had already walked to his truck and sat beside the passenger door. Earl scratched his beard. "Don't look at me. I raised her with better taste, but dogs are mysterious failures." "You sure?" Eli asked. Earl's face hardened for half a second, the way old grief often disguised itself as irritation. Then he nodded. "She'll visit. Her pups are here. I'm here. That dog's got a heart big enough to run roots." Mercy visited often. At Mercy House she became less like a patient and more like the quiet matriarch of the place. Her coat regained its shine, yellow and black beneath the basement lamps. The torn ear remained, as did the pale oil drop mark below her right eye. Her old leather collar still carried Earl's small metal furnace tag, and the faint tick of it became part of the basement's soundscape. Keys, cups, tools, dog tag. Her pups destroyed all dignity. One tumbled into Amos's shoe during a prayer circle and fell asleep there. One gnawed the corner of Beatrice Larkin's clipboard while she was explaining emergency fuel oversight, and Beatrice, to everyone's amazement, allowed it to live. The smallest male, the one Eli had warmed in his hands until he cried, became known as Button because June said he was too small to be anything respectable. Earl took one pup home when he was strong enough. He chose a steady female with dark paws and a habit of sitting on invoices. He named her Gage. Amos kept Button at the church, though he claimed the pup was a temporary pastoral assistant. No one believed him. The remaining pups went to adult homes that Hannah inspected with the severity of a general choosing officers. Mercy watched each departure with solemn patience, as if she understood that love did not lessen by being entrusted elsewhere. Nora Whitlake came every Tuesday. The first time, people went quiet. She deserved that. Forgiveness in Mercy House did not come preheated. Nora sat at the paperwork table with her old blue calculator, the one that had belonged to her mother, and helped Mavis read her revised assistance form. Her voice shook. Mavis listened, signed nothing until every word was explained, then said, "Come back next week. I still don't trust half these letters." Nora nodded. "That's fair." It was not absolution. It was a beginning. Darren Holt came too, though he entered like a man expecting to be thrown out. He brought lumber for the back steps and fixed the rotted boards without asking for thanks. Mercy growled the first time she heard the metal ring of his truck keys. Darren froze, face pale, then removed the keys and set them on the floor away from him. "Sorry," he said to the dog. Mercy stared for a long time. Then she turned away. Darren accepted that as more mercy than he had earned. June made him eat 2 bowls of soup before letting him lift a hammer. "A man trying to make amends on an empty stomach will drive nails crooked," she said. Darren looked at the bowl. "I'm not sure soup fixes character." "No," June said, "but it keeps character from fainting before it improves." Eli watched those moments from the edges at first. He had spent years being useful in ways that ended quickly. A repaired latch, a stacked cord of wood, a cleared driveway before dawn. Mercy House asked something harder of him. It asked him to return. It asked him to know people's names and remember which stairs creaked under Mavis's left foot, which forms made Lorraine's hands shake, which cough of Clifford's meant pride, and which meant actual trouble. It asked him to be seen. Hannah noticed before he admitted it. One late afternoon, she came to his cabin to check Mercy and the pups that still visited with her. The day had been bright and bitter, the snow outside so clean it hurt to look at. Eli had set Claire's photograph on the kitchen table where lamplight could reach it. He had not planned to do that. One morning, he had simply stopped turning it away. Hannah saw the photograph but did not comment at first. Mercy slept by the stove, her side rising and falling. Button, visiting from the church, had collapsed upside down against Eli's boot, as if trusting the world was a skill he had been born with. Hannah finished checking Mercy and packed her bag. "Claire had kind eyes," she said. Eli stood at the sink, washing 2 mugs. "She'd tell you they were tired eyes." Both can be true. He dried 1 mug slowly. "She liked ugly flea market things," he said. "Broken lamps, cracked bowls. That's Zippo." He nodded toward the scratched lighter on the table. Said unwanted things were usually just waiting for someone with imagination. Hannah leaned against the counter. "Sounds like she had dangerous standards. She married me." "That proves my point." He looked at her then. The smile that came was small, uncertain, and gone quickly, but it arrived alive. Hannah did not reach for it. She did not name it. She only picked up her bag and said, "Coffee next time?" "You asking as a vet?" "No." He nodded once. Then yes. That was all. It was more than enough. The final soup night of February came under falling snow. Mercy House had decided to hold a community supper, though June insisted the word community made everything sound like it needed a committee and therefore less gravy. Tables filled the basement, lanterns hung from pipes. The sign Earl had made watched over the stairwell. People brought bread, stew, pies, pickled vegetables, thermoses of coffee, and, in Clifford's case, a pot of something he called chili, and June called a lawsuit with beans. Beatrice served coffee without being asked. Nora helped Lorraine review a letter from the county. Darren fixed a loose hinge near the pantry. Amos carried Button in one arm, while pretending the pup had climbed there against his will. Earl sat beside Mercy, one hand resting on her head, while Gage slept under his chair. Eli stood near the back wall for a while. Old habit. Then Mavis waved him over, not dramatically, just a small hand above a bowl of soup. There was room at the table. That was the thing about Mercy House. It did not demand a man explain why he had stood apart. It simply kept a chair open until he noticed. Eli sat. June placed a bowl in front of him. "Eat. You're getting that noble starving look men get when they want people to think they're spiritual?" "I wasn't trying to look spiritual." "Then you should be more careful with your face." Amos laughed like a bell in an old tower. For a while the basement was only warmth. Spoons touched bowls, boots dried by the wall. Someone argued over the best way to thaw a frozen pipe. Earl accused a volunteer of insulting a wrench. Hannah sat across from Eli with coffee between both hands, listening to June tell a story that somehow involved a raccoon, a wedding cake, and a sheriff who had since moved away. Mercy lay under the table with her head on Eli's boot, not guarding, resting. After supper, Eli went upstairs alone. The sanctuary was dim, lit only by the candles left near the pulpit and the gray-blue glow from the windows. Snow fell beyond the glass, softening the world. The pews stood in rows, empty now, bearing the echoes of accusation, confession, labor, prayer, laughter, and the thin cry of a puppy who had chosen breath. Eli walked to the back pew and sat. For years, prayer had felt to him like a room where someone else had locked the door. He had stood outside it with his anger, his questions, his folded flag of a heart. People had told him God understood. That had only made him angrier. Understanding had not brought Claire back. It had not put him beside her bed in time. He lowered himself to one knee, not because he was suddenly whole, not because grief had become a lesson tied with ribbon, because he had no better posture for honesty. "I'm still angry," he said into the quiet. The words did not echo much. The church took them gently. "I don't know what to do with that." He looked toward the front, where the cross stood above the altar in shadow. "But I'm here." That was all. No bargain, no grand surrender, no heavenly warmth rushing through the beams. Just the truth, plain and tired. Behind him, nails clicked softly on the aisle. Mercy came beside him and lowered her head onto his knee. Her fur smelled faintly of wood smoke, milk, and winter air. Eli placed one hand on the torn edge of her ear. Downstairs, laughter rose through the floor. Outside, Iron Range lay under snow, white and vast, like a kingdom forgiven only in part, and still asked to prove it by morning. Eli thought of Claire's photograph on the kitchen table, Earl's crooked sign, Nora's trembling hands over honest numbers, Darren setting his keys on the floor, June feeding the guilty and the innocent with equal force, Amos ringing a bell into a storm, Hannah asking for coffee without pretending it was medicine. Mercy breathed against him. Eli understood then that mercy did not erase winter. It did not return the dead, cancel pain, or make a man innocent of every absence he regretted. It did not turn broken systems holy by naming them. Mercy was harder than that. Stranger, more demanding. It placed warmth in human hands and asked what they would do with it. Eli bowed his head. For the first time in years, he did not feel alone inside the silence. And when he finally stood, mercy rose with him, steady at his side, ready to walk back down to the light where people were still cold, still flawed, still hungry, still worth saving. The lesson of this story is not only that mercy can save a life, it is that mercy must be chosen before it feels convenient. Eli did not heal because the winter ended. He began to heal because he stopped walking past the cold. Mercy House was not built by perfect people. It was built by people who finally decided that no neighbor should suffer alone and that doing the right thing late is still better than never doing it at all. In our own lives, we may not face a blizzard in Minnesota, but we all know someone sitting quietly in a cold room of the heart. Sometimes God asks us to bring warmth, not with grand words, but with one honest act, one open door, one bowl of soup, one refusal to look away. If this story touched you, share in the comments what mercy's courage meant to you. And if you believe small acts of kindness can still change a life, please subscribe for more stories of faith, loyalty, and second chances. May God give you the courage to notice the cold around you and the grace to bring warmth where it is needed most.